And I have many apologies that I have to say publicly on this video because I have debated this like fervently. All right. Welcome, nerds and girls, to the first tier ranking video on the Nerdy Ernie channel. I am here with my humble court of fellow Christopher Nolan fans. Today, we are going to be tier ranking the Christopher Nolan oeuvre, as it were. And boys, let me just send a quick reminder to y'all that this is not a democracy. This is but a benevolent monarchy here in the Nerdy Ernie kingdom. And my ranking will be final. However, as I said, this is a benevolent monarchy, and I am a king who can be swayed by his court. So if you feel strongly about a certain or particular movie, please, I invite you to speak up. All right?
Good.
Right.
All
We'll
right.
disrupt the dictatorship.
Let's just kick this thing off. So I'm just gonna do an easy one. Bam. If we can't agree on that one, then this whole thing is just all for naught, and I miscalculated my court.
Yeah.
You're right.
Are there any dissenters?
No,
Okay.
not even a little bit.
Do we want to fangirl over it? So I mean,
Yes.
that's the first pick.
It's
I feel like we should talk about it.
the best superhero movie of all time, and
Absolutely.
it was absolutely robbed in Best Picture. And
What won it that year?
I think
2008, Slumdog Millionaire, right?
Oh my god.
Oh wow.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, Slumdog's not S tier anywhere else.
Dude, and the staying power of The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
Right.
No other superhero film has been able to top it. Not even close.
It's a film that as we are being more and more bombarded with MCU just garbage, it's a film that as every year passes, The Dark Knight becomes more and more important, and it grows in stature. It's 15 years on, it's just getting stronger.
I agree.
That's my take, is that with each passing year, it's a movie that just gets better and better and better.
It has aged like a fine wine.
Absolutely.
One of the criteria and how I did my ranking was rewatchability, and that kind of adds. I mean, that's totally supportive of that. Like, you could rewatch this a million times.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, so I think maybe if we're going to just so we can limit the any unnecessary amount of disagreement, maybe we should establish some kind of criteria for how we evaluate these. So Ryan, what do you think makes a movie good?
Oh yes, this is some good stuff. Well, specifically for the Nolan movies, the way I wanted to look at them, I looked at rewatchability, first time viewing emotion, and that impact on you. And that could be emotions that you felt, or just if it was the first time seeing something like that and it blew you away. So that's first time viewing emotion. And then if it was context or themes that are touched in the film, I'm a big metaphor guy, or just trying to weave in crazy themes, which no one can really do, or really tough scientific themes. So those are what I thought about. What about you guys?
Bernie?
So I think we have to divide popcorn film from films that are actually trying to be artistically or are artistically saying something, right?
You evaluate them differently?
Yeah, like I'm not gonna judge The Dark Knight the same way that I judge Transformers. Like, look, Michael Bay is one of the best directors of our generation. Transformers, one of the most entertaining films of our generation. But do I view it in the same light as a Dark Knight or literally any film that's in this ranking? No, not at all. Transformers is very much just like popcorn, turn your brain off. I love the CGI. I love Optimus Prime's voice. The Allspark. Like I just that I judge it differently than I would a film that's, like artistically trying to say something. So with that in mind, the biggest criteria for me when I look at film is what did it shed on human nature to me? What sort of light did it shed on human nature for me? Right. Whether that's through character, or in the example of, say, like 2001 A Space Odyssey, did it rearrange my brain in some way? Basically, how did the art move me? Was it intellectually? Was it spiritually? Was it emotionally? And I kind of gauge off those three bars. So yeah, that's my criteria. Jacob, you go next.
By the way, is my audio okay? Can everybody
Yeah.
You're good.
hear
Yeah.
me? Okay, I
Yep.
don't have a mic, or I'm in a quiet room, so
Yeah, you're
we're
raw
good
dogging
though.
it.
It's
We're good.
perfect. Yeah.
Good. Man, that's such a tough question for me. I relate a lot to what Ernie said. The last part is just sort of, for me, film is first and foremost an emotional medium, and so much of what I'm seeing and interacting with on the screen, if I'm not connecting to it in a certain way, if I'm not drawn into the world that it's creating, then I'm not going to have as strong an evaluation of it than I would otherwise. Number two is themes. I'm a theme guy. I really love to take something and really just try to sort of see what it's trying to say, or what I think it's trying to say, and I'm more drawn to certain themes than others. For me in particular, that's part of the reason why I love The Dark Knight so much, is I think that the thematic content of it is just so strong. But yeah, I mean, those are my first, I would say, two. My sort of like first reaction when I'm watching something is, am I emotionally connected to it? And am I invested in the themes that are being talked about? Beyond that, I don't know. It's a tough question, because, like, you don't look at a Christopher Nolan film the same way you look at a David Lynch film, the same way you don't look at a Stanley Kubrick film. I mean, they're all have their own sort of criteria through which you judge it and which you connect to it. For me, a lot of Christopher Nolan, I think Nolan's at his best when he is going with these big, bold concepts that are rooted in some sort of emotional core. There's an emotional core aspect of the storytelling. Those are, for me, my favorite Christopher Nolan films, and that's like my sort of inherent bias and like how I judge his sort of filmography. So yeah, that's what I would say for me is emotion and themes.
Sweet. All right, LeBron, round us off.
Uh, the way that I evaluate stories is so like for me the most important thing is the themes. It's the thematic discussion. And um I guess the simplest way to describe the way that I evaluate any narrative is like a measure of its narrative density. So like I don't like, so there are, for instance, some films or some novels where I think they have something sort of interesting to say, and like, or they're exploring a theme that I find very interesting, but like they have maybe like one interesting statement to make with regard to this theme, and they sort of repeat it. They state it once, and they don't really elaborate on it, right? So it's like it has low thematic density, right? What I like is when there's like a lot of interesting thematic discussion happening, you know, per line of text, per minute of screen time, right? Because otherwise, I find it very boring, right? There are some films that have, I think, interesting themes, but they don't elaborate or it's not a deep discussion of the themes, and so I kind of get bored, even though the idea is interesting, right? That would be like my so like that would be my definition of like something that's ambitious, but like isn't necessarily a success, right? Like an interesting set of themes, but just not a deep elaboration. Um, so that's the number one thing for me. Now I am more drawn to some themes than others, but as long as there's like a deep discussion and the discussion is dense, I think I could find anything interesting really. Um, I tend to like be most interested in themes with regard to like perception versus reality, identity, violence, that sort of thing. But then, one of my favorite films of all time is a film called In the Mood for Love, and it's like about love. Um, and yeah, I think that most romantic films are absolute garbage. But that one's like
Not enough
um
violence for you?
no. Well, yeah, so the other important thing that I would mention is that specifically when evaluating something like medium specific, so like a film, or a novel. So like let's take an example of a novel. Sometimes um uh so sometimes you'll watch a television show and a critic will say this show is very cinematic, or you'll watch a film and a critic will say it's poetic. I think what they're saying there is that the way in which it has its thematic discussion, it explores its theme, is in a way that's common in poetry if it's poetic, or common in film if it's cinematic. And I think the best stories in any medium are the ones that use the tools, like the tools that are available to you only within that medium. So, like for instance, um, you know, there's been many, many attempts to adapt like the great novels of William Faulkner, for instance, to the screen. And it's kind of failed because the way in which he tells the story is very literary, right? It doesn't really translate well to the screen. And I give him some serious points for that as a novelist because I think he's taking advantage of like narrative and thematic tools available to him that are only available to him as a novelist. So I do give extra points for films being cinematic, using specific cinematic tools to discuss their themes, right? So yeah, narrative density and cinematic. If a film has those two things, then I think it's good.
So, on that note, would you say that The Dark Knight basically maxes out all your guys' criteria for what you're looking for? Yeah, Jacob already said like this is thematically on point for what he typically looks for. Oscar, would you say that this is narratively dense for the themes that it's covering?
Yeah, I think so. It's also I guess I also give points, some points, if it's like an interesting set of themes. So the sort of set of themes that I find the most common, the most really the most banal, the ones where like when there's like a lot of lazy storytelling, are like themes with regard to, you know, um like coming of age, with love, with family, with good versus evil. So like you'll watch like there are a lot of films that are created where like it seems to me like the sort of ultimate thematic statement that they make is something like, good always prevails, right? And that's often really boring because in part because I don't think they make a good argument for it. Um, but also in part because um, like I've seen that sort of ultimate thematic statement 1,000 times. So
Mm.
stuff like that. I do give some extra points for when the set of themes are unique. So I will give points to The Dark Knight because I don't think thematically it's the typical superhero film.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I think it explores the idea of morality in a way that superhero films like really never do. So
Hmm.
something that I've well, I don't know what you guys think that this film is about thematically, but um I get the sense so like Batman kind of sees himself as um like a kind of cop, right? But he also works outside of the rules of that are the rules that pertain to cops in Gotham. Um, but he also has like these sort of self-imposed ethical rules, ethical principles. One of them, obviously, is that he doesn't kill anyone, right? And um, that's not quite the same thing as like saying like I'm never going to be violent, right? But there's like a similar sort of it's like analogous with that principle. So like that's something that I've seen, for instance, um in like Miyazaki films like Studio Ghibli. So like a common theme I see in some of those is like the how difficult it is to be like a pacifist in an inherently violent world. I think that's like kind of the struggle that Batman's going in this film.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily um like that he's being a pacifist, but even like just, not killing
His
anyone is
morals,
difficult.
yeah, his morals in an unmoral world,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
he
exactly.
has his own law. And on the like good always prevails kind of
Mhm.
thing, the themes in this one kind of tests that because it puts heroism and morality kind of on a spectrum and nothing's absolute, saying like this is totally good, it's gonna win, this is totally bad, it's gonna win. It's like even the line, like it's the hero that we need or the hero that we deserve, not that we need, or whatever it is. I don't think I think I butchered it,
No,
but
yeah, that was
No,
right.
that's right.
is that right? Okay.
That's right.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's right.
even in that line, there's like a whole paradox and kind of it's gray. It's not black or white.
I know what you
Yeah.
mean.
I I think one of my favorite, and I'm thinking we're gonna spend this whole recording talking about the Dark Knight. That's how good it is.
It'd be so easy to do.
I know,
It'd be so
but
easy to just talk about
my
it.
my quick 2 cents on Dark Knight is I think one of my favorite aspects of it thematically is sort of the conversation that Christopher Nolan is having between someone who is completely tethered and rigid to a moral code versus someone who is completely unhinged and untethered from a moral code. But also above that, like within that argument is, can you stick to your moral code when it becomes personal, right? Because so much of Batman versus Joker is him sticking to his code and sticking to his morality when it's someone he absolutely is like romantically involved with, but also Gotham, who it like represents his family and his family legacy and things like that. So that was probably the thing that moved me the most in terms of like Batman's arc in particular in the movie. And that's probably another criteria that I should have mentioned, but I'm so much like a character viewer or a character reader and pretty much any piece of art that I ingest. But yeah, those are my quick 2 cents. Jacob, I'll let you go.
Oh man, I could talk about this. I could talk about The Dark Knight for hours. I mean, I the summer of 2008, ripe age of 13 years old, just seeing this movie, growing up with my brother and watching this film all the time. And we touched earlier about how it continues to grow in stature. But for me personally, The Dark Knight, it makes such a lasting impression as the years goes by, and it changes. So most recently, I watched it, and I hadn't watched it in a while, and it connected with me on the level of an author that I really enjoy, Cormac McCarthy, who talks so much about in life, going up against something that you fundamentally don't understand, you don't align with. And I think that, in this story, the Batman meeting the Joker, Batman sort of has this moral high ground. He commits himself to a certain code of ethics and conduct, and the Joker doesn't, and that's something that Batman can't understand. There's that line that Alfred says that some men just want to see the world burn. And I think as I get older, that sort of resonates with me on such a deep level. Not only in this, but within the context of Cormac McCarthy. And it just strikes me as such a unique story of dealing with something, of confronting something that at its core, you just don't understand, and the burden of doing that, the sort of toll that it takes on you, mentally, physically, spiritually, and that just really, really, really resonates with me. So yeah, that was my big takeaway this last time. I think that the relationship between Batman and Joker is just so well done. Mentally, just trying to understand each other, and not being able to understand. And so yeah, I mean, that for me is my most recent takeaway from it. Like I said, I could talk it for hours. I love this movie. Not only do I think it's the best comic book movie of all time, but like it's like one of my top 5 favorite movies.
Yeah,
so
agreed.
it's just I mean, it's everything you could want in a story, in a movie. Big bold concepts, age-old themes, huge set pieces, thrilling. It's emotional. It's just everything. It's just everything you want for me.
And that's to say nothing about the performances as well.
Right.
Heath Ledger in this is just otherworldly good.
For me, it's one of the few times you watch a movie, and for me, like, I don't see Heath Ledger, I see the Joker. I don't compare this performance to like anything else, because it's just such a one of a kind, all-time performance. Generally, when I see a film and I assess an actor's performance, I think, okay, this is similar to this, or this person did good work in this movie in relation to this. Like this is a completely one of one, in a way that I think very rarely happens.
Yep, totally agree. So all of that to say, The Dark Knight is S tier, and it will remain in the top spot. That was a long way to say that's our S tier movie, and to kick off. All right, so moving on. I want to get the other end of the spectrum on this. So I'm going to put this guy there. So just to give you guys a heads up, I'm going to put a movie in every tier. That's how I'm going to do this.
Okay.
Just so we don't put everything in like one tier or something like that. We've got to put one movie in each tier. So I'm putting Insomnia in D tier. I watched that movie once a long time ago. It was when I like legitimately became like a huge Nolan fanboy, and I was like, oh, I got to watch everything he's made. And I'm pretty sure I watched it like right after Following. And I just remember thinking like, yeah, okay. It's a pretty by the numbers murder mystery. It was pretty forgettable. I like all the time I forget that it's a Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, any objections to this?
No, not for me.
I don't really have a strong opinion on this. So
yeah, I also, I would just say that I've seen it one time too, and I don't think it left a great impression on me. I was just like, yeah, it's fine.
Right.
Yeah. I will say this one, like the backstory of this, he didn't write this story. Like he got pulled onto this. So that I think he's one of these guys where he needs full control from 0 to 100.
For sure.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, I think that I read that basically after Following, after the first few, he didn't really like have a big return, and so I think this was like an offer from a major studio. He took it to just sort of like do like a money project, kind of like, play it safe a little bit, and sort of see where it took him, if I remember correctly.
I mean, there's big names in the movie.
Mm.
It's a big cast.
That is true. Yeah.
Mm.
But yeah, I
Right.
think more than anything, this was just so like I didn't actively hate it, I didn't dislike it, but it was just like yeah, like we said, just forgettable, just not really leaving a lasting impression. And it also just didn't feel like a Nolan film, You think Nolan and he, like we've mentioned a lot here, like high concept, he's usually really brainy with his script, and this was just kind of a standard paint by the numbers murder mystery.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that with like these types of, because I think the budget was like kind of middle of the middle budget, not big budget, not small budget. It was, I think, a significant step up in budget following Memento.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those films, I think, during that period in Hollywood, the sort of middle budget film, they were a niche filled by, like essentially they would only be created if big name actors could get attached to it. And so they were the ones calling the shots. Not that like, I mean, I think that, people like Pacino and, Robin Williams, they know how to pick a role, but, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think it was necessarily Nolan's vision. So,
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. LeBron, pick a movie except Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, we're doing last.
LeBron James.
what's a controversial one here? Let's do Interstellar.
Ooh,
Interstellar. I don't think this is all that controversial.
Where are you gonna put it?
Bam.
agreed.
That's an easy S tier for me. Easy.
Agreed.
Yes.
Top four for me. Top four.
Not S tier, LeBron.
Love this movie.
I've gotta know what you like. Would those be the only two films you would put in S tier?
So, okay,
Or do you think
so
that there could be other S tier films?
this is another thing. So the way that I slot them is also going to be the order that like they're ranked within
Okay.
the tier, right? So Interstellar is
Okay.
S tier, but behind The Dark Knight, right? So
Okay. Yeah, you're saying
am I going to
you're
be? Are there going to be other S tier? Maybe we'll see.
Okay.
I
So there's
mean,
not a max per tier.
There's got to be one
Right.
in each. That's it.
there's got to be
Okay.
One in
yeah,
each.
I do think there will be at least one in each.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, well, here, maybe you guys can convince me otherwise. Ernie, why do you think it's S tier? What do you think
Okay.
this movie's about?
Holy cow. So I didn't get to rewatch all Nolan films within the last, we'll call it 6 months or something. But Interstellar I did rewatch, and oh my gosh, man. This is one of those movies that I can just rewatch and rewatch and rewatch. First off, just personally, I am a big Matthew McConaughey fan, and specifically during this era, I think it was 2014, was during his McConaissance, the Matthew McConaughey renaissance. Like he was doing True Detective at this time, Dallas Buyers Club, Interstellar. Like this man was just going banger after banger after banger. And for me personally, I think this is by far Christopher Nolan's most emotional film. I was
Agreed.
moved the most emotionally speaking
Mm.
out of any Christopher Nolan film. Now, that's not to say that it wasn't like high concept and also didn't make me think, because that's also true. It also presented to me like a lot of really interesting concepts that at the time, I feel like we weren't discussing as a society a lot. I feel like physics has kind of come more into, or at least theoretical physics has come more into like the limelight and the conversation. But back then, like not really. So that stuff, it just kind of put me down into a rabbit hole into another interest that I got into, really. I guess growing up, I was always interested in the stars and like what's out there and stuff like that. But Interstellar really like gave me concrete ideas to think about, and also made like visual representations of that. The themes on like family and stuff like that weren't, I guess by your definition, wouldn't be super narratively dense, but McConaughey's performance in that, I think, kind of made up for that for me. What's your rebuttal to that?
Well, okay. So we're gonna discuss one film at a time, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think so. What you mentioned about how like the sort of thematic discussion with regard to love and family isn't as deep or as like the way that like doesn't have the depth of discussion as in pro uh I would say in most other Nolan films. But you think well you think that it's not um the most uh like not necessarily the deepest thematic discussion
Right. Like
of it.
basically to use your example, like it didn't it had one answer, right? It said basically love transcends time and space, right? That's
Right,
kind of what he was saying. But
right.
he doesn't say it in any other way, and he's just saying that that's it. Love transcends time and space, and we're gonna let Matthew McConaughey's performance kind of speak to that. And we're not really gonna say that in any more complex ways, I guess.
So I think that like I don't have anything wrong with making that kind of thematic statement. So like remember what I said earlier is like thematic density is important for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um so like I think one of the sort of like uh thematic structures that storytellers take sometimes with their stories is like they'll have like a specific theme and like a certain thematic statement that they want to make. And the way in which they uh like support that statement is by trying to illustrate like provide as many illustrations as possible of
Mm-hmm.
that idea in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can so like an example of this would be like so there's this really good novel um published in 1955. It's called The Recognitions by William Gaddis. And uh I think like one of the sort of central thematic statements made in that novel is that like there's a lot of inauthenticity in the world, and it's
Mm-hmm.
difficult to distinguish between authenticity and inauthenticity. And so
Mm-hmm.
he provides like many illustrations of that. The main character is like an aspiring artist, an aspiring painter, but he can't make money with his paintings. So the way that he makes money is by partnering with these sort of shady like art dealers who say, "Hey, if you can paint us these forged image like recreations of the old masters, we'll sell them like they're the rediscovered ones, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll give you a cut of the um we'll give you a cut of the profit." Like, and then um there's a playwright and there's a playwright character, and he gets accused of plagiarism, which is something that happens. Um, the general sort of inauthenticity that exists in the art world, like people being pretentious. Um, he's the son of a pastor, and um, one of the sort of things that his father does is um like he sort of criticizes people for not being steadfast in their faith. Meanwhile, like in his personal life, he's like doing experiments in alchemy and reading comparative religion, right? Like he's not steadfast in his faith at all. And then like when the main character has something that could be perceived as like a sort of religious experience, he thinks to himself like, is this an authentic religious experience? Right? Like the people that I'm fooling in the art world are pretty smart. Um, and I consider myself pretty smart. Am I being fooled by the universe in the same way that I'm fooling them? It's like the question of authenticity versus inauthenticity is everywhere, and that novel illustrates just how much it permeates, our like the human experience. Now, it's so I think like one of the ways in which that novel is structured is it has that's one of the central thematic statements, and it illustrates many times um like it provides many examples of that support that thematic statement. So I think in the case of Interstellar, like it's not I don't think that the thematic statement is bad in and of itself, but like I just for a film that was like pretty long,
Yeah.
I thought that like there weren't a lot of illustrations of the idea. I think there was basically just one, and the whole film was just building to that one illustration at the end, like the scene in the Tesseract, right?
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I guess you could say that one, and also the sort of scene, like when he sees his daughter for the first time,
Hmm.
But
and he's still
also,
young.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Go ahead,
yeah. But then
go ahead.
also, there's another love string
Okay.
where the female astronaut that is the daughter of the head of NASA is trying to go see Matt Damon.
Well, who
So
wouldn't want to
there's
go see
another.
Matt Damon?
You're right.
Oh, you're
You're
right.
right.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's only like one other
No,
one,
Yeah.
but
okay,
And,
okay.
and
But
and there's also the overarching theme of like, do you choose love over humanity, right? Like
right.
the fate of the
mm,
human race, stuff like
Mhm.
that. So, but I agree with you, Oscar, that it is like I said, I do think it's he has his answer, right? Love transcends space and time, and like you said, they were building to that kind of like one scene, that one conclusion. But that whole buildup was amazing, and like I said, Maddie McConaughey's performance just like nails it. Um, Jacob, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh man, this is another one that I just have such good memories of. I went and saw this on Thanksgiving night in 2014 in the theater with my brother. So like like I'm willing to admit that this film has some like pretty serious flaws. Like maybe not serious, but like it has some pretty obvious flaws. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the last portion really like landed, like yeah, I don't think it was a smooth landing. I think that there was some
Hmm.
I think that Nolan sort of I don't know. I think that the ending is kind of a little bit flat. I don't necessarily know if I'm buying into the whole bookshelf being you know what I mean? I don't necessarily
Okay.
know if
Yeah,
I
yeah,
buy
yeah.
into all of that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm convinced that that whole section worked. But that being said, I do think it is I think that this is some of the most effective emotional storytelling that Nolan has ever done thus far. It just has such a tender, soulful backbone to it that to me just I mean it just works me like a puppet every time I watch it. I do love this movie. I really do. I will say that I think out of the S tier films for my personal ranking, this would probably be the lowest. But again,
Hmm.
I'm basing my ranking off of my experiences with it. And I've just grown up. It's another film like The Dark Knight. I've grown up my formative years. I've spent watching this movie over and over and over again. And so it just it works for me for the most part. Um, yeah, great performances all the way around as usual. The score is the main score, the main
Oh
theme
my God. Yeah.
we haven't
is
even
Han,
talked about.
incredible.
Hans Zimmer just
Yeah,
killed it.
the whole like the whole extra solar planets that they land on and that I think is really cool. I will also say one thing I do really appreciate about it is just to sort of counter my point the last portion. I do think that it is a really interesting sort of take on how different theoretical physics concepts would work. It presents a side of science that I think is more mystical, is a bit more uh uh less, I guess, mechanical. There's this
Right.
sort of intrigue, and I think that if to what extent I know theoretical physics, which is not very much, but there is that sort of aspect that is present that we are sort of working to solve this giant puzzle that is deeply mysterious and strange. And I think that's represented in the film pretty well. It's an interesting aspect of it. So yeah, I love this movie. I think this movie's great.
Okay, Ryan, is this an S tier for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
I cried.
End of discussion.
Serious.
So Oscar, if this is not S tier for you, are you arguing for it for A tier?
I think A tier's fair. I think so. Like outside of the depth of the thematic discussion, there's good width, right? There's like a lot of
It's girthy.
it's girthy,
Girth.
right? Yeah. Like some environmental themes about love and family, about
Yeah.
time. Um, it's definitely cinematic, especially when it's discussing when it's like trying to visually represent the non-family and love themes. Like its visual representations of time and space is like definitely some of the best in recent memory. Um, I love the score too. The score is very good. The score is a meme. I listen
Yeah.
I listen to the I listen to that music both ironically and unironically. It's just so good. Um, yeah, but like the thematic depth is the single most important thing for me. So I'll take some points off for that. But like everything else around it, I think um propels it to A for me.
Okay.
I
You
will.
presented your arguments, and I have ruled this S tier still.
Oh,
Jacob?
Jacob.
I was just gonna say, one more just really quick point about Interstellar is I think that
Yeah.
in recent memory, it provides one of the, I think, better pictures of sort of where we are going as a species. Think that a lot of movies sort of fumble the ball in like the future, but I think that Interstellar provides a really interesting, believable picture. So,
Yeah, I think more so
Anyway.
than any other movie, this movie's world building was really good. Like the
Yeah, for
immersiveness
sure.
and believability of this like future society and kind of planetary situation we were in was really believable.
Hmm.
I
Okay.
what I hope is that some young filmmaker becomes inspired by that film and like takes the sort of like tries to construct that similar kind of world
Hmm.
um and you know makes like a just an even better film, right?
Mm.
Like it builds a bit like I think that this will be an influential film and a young science fiction loving young filmmaker will see this and build off the work of Nolan and maybe make a science fiction masterpiece. I don't know.
Maybe like a
That's
Great
what I hope.
biography.
idea.
That's what I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because, like, I think that like if you look back, every sort of generation has their big giant sci-fi epic, and I feel like this was ours, and I think it's a really good one.
Interesting.
I think that if you look, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, obviously the original Solaris, um,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. That I think that's an interesting point. That sort of the nucleus of this film is good enough to like make and generate the next sort of big idea sci-fi epic. That's interesting. It's an interesting
Yeah.
take.
Boom. Those are all sound like arguments for me to put it in S tier. This all just I need a gavel for
agree.
this episode. Like
Reconfirm.
S tier. Boom, gavel. All right. Ryan, you pick the next one.
I'm gonna pick my favorite Nolan movie,
Okay.
Whoa,
Memento.
Memento.
Okay.
that's your favorite one?
Favorite one.
Okay.
Where's it going?
Oh
See?
no.
Oh,
Oh, no way. Uh,
Yeah,
I
I've got
argue.
this one in A tier. So I've got a couple arguments for this. I mean, so one thing that's really driving, like a huge driver for why I love this movie so much is the story surrounding it, right? Like it's low budget, and you can kind of see where they made those like budgetary compromises, but it in no way compromised the story or the performances or just like what they were trying to say with this movie. And that for me gets extra points. Like I really love that aspect of it. However, the reason it's not exactly S tier for me is because I do think Nolan was still ironing out his little kinks in terms of like getting across exposition, and sort of like the world building aspect of it. And granted, because of the narrative structure of this film, those things are just inherently going to be difficult. But because of that, regardless of that, I wasn't moved emotionally in the same way that I was with, say, The Dark Knight or Interstellar, right? So, like I said before, a big factor for how I enjoy art in general is just like how I am moved emotionally. And so, because of that, I didn't find Memento like in that same ranking of like, did it move me in the same way that those other two films did? So, because of that, it's A tier. Dissenters, Ryan. I know you're a dissenter.
I'll dissent you. I dissent you. So first part on like the context, real world context of him. Part of what makes it an S tier for me, yes, it's his first kind of film, but the context of him going from Following, which was like a $5,000 budget,
right,
to getting like it was like $4 million to make this big names were in it. And I think just thinking psychologically about that break that Nolan got, like in his mind, like how big that is and how he still hit the money with this. I think that context like really is really cool to me and propels it to S. Um, this is one of the things where this is the first time I ever saw a movie like this. And maybe there are more out there where it's not told chronologically. This is, and part of it is, I don't think if Nolan didn't make this film, like if Nolan didn't make this film, we wouldn't have some of these other films after. I think this was necessary in the lineage of Nolan
Hard agree.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I
So
think
the
it was necessary.
influence of Memento is also carrying
It was like
this
the
S tier for you.
influence that happened after the exercise of like doing it, creating it. Like he had that spark, that idea of to tell it this way. And yeah, I think without that, we wouldn't have gotten the films that we've gotten.
Okay.
Maybe another thing is like the twist, like the Sammy Jenkins storyline. Yeah. So those are my two dissents.
Jacob?
I think so. I love this film. I think this movie is great. This was honestly for my ranking, 1 through 12. This was 5. So it's A tier for me, but like I mean it's just barely didn't make the cut for S tier. I think that this is an incredibly ambitious, radical, exciting, just it's just such a banger of a movie. I mean, it's got everything for me personally that I could want in a movie. I haven't ever seen. I've seen some things that do some weird thing with time, but I think that to put the audience and the viewer in the mindset of the protagonist in the way that Christopher Nolan does it is just so interesting. I again another movie, and like most of these movies, it's a movie that I grew up watching with my brother. So I have really strong emotional ties to it. But yeah, I just think that it's just such a radical. In some ways, I think it's still Nolan's most radical attempt at telling a story through time, twisting time. I think that even still, Memento might be his most sort of radical take on it. But it just it ticks all the boxes for me. At its core, it's a thriller. It's a sort of a high octane, edge of your seat, nerve wracking type film that follows a really postmodern, unorthodox storytelling technique. It's been a while since I've seen this. I actually didn't rewatch it for this, but I'm pretty comfortable in saying that, yeah, I think it's an A tier. Guy Pearce is phenomenal in it.
Yeah.
Carrie Ann Moss is phenomenal in it.
Yeah.
Some really good performances, and then obviously, the way that it all wraps up, I think is just thrilling. It reminds me a lot of David Lynch film Lost Highway. There's just some weird sort of just stylistic choices that I think Nolan does that really harken back to this almost sort of Lynchian, surreal, weird kind of vision. It also really reminds me of Mulholland Drive, and just the way that that movie is sort of a puzzle within a puzzle. It's sort of like going from one thing to the next to the next. That sort of like kind of in a similar way, it sort of all kind of compounds on each other. But obviously, the vision and the sort of execution is different. But again, it plays to my senses. I love this movie. I could watch this movie all day, every day, and never get tired of it. It's great.
It's also
LeBron,
like
your thoughts?
it's also like Lost Highway in that it ends where it begins.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Um, but okay, so with a Memento, what I'll say is that um I think that thematically, it was a big step up from Following.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, I think since Memento, with regard to like Nolan being able to conceptualize his stories visually, he's taken some big steps since Memento. So I think with regard to like trying to make this film cinematic, trying to express it visually, craft a visual story, it's like it's 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 proto Nolan. He's not quite polished yet. I think there is one thing that I think really works for it is like the characters are kind of the characters within in the story are they're kind of like it's kind of like a gritty, it gives me the feel of like a gritty neo-noir type story, and the film is very grainy. So I think aesthetically that really works for it. But and it also does another thing interesting visually, which I'm sure we're going to discuss with another big film, is that um much of the film is in color, but there are certain sequences in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Yeah.
black and white sequences are the only sequences that have narration until, of course, the final scene. And so that was like um that like that's like a visual motif that Nolan obviously used again in a couple of his other films. I think he used it to great effect in Oppenheimer. But I think the way he used it in Oppenheimer is a little bit different than he used it in Memento.
Right.
In
Yeah.
Memento, um, the so like with regard to the charge that it rely. I mean, I kind of think that even in some of Nolan's best films, he relies too heavily on exposition.
Mm.
Um, yeah, like I'll say this about Memento. There are certain films uh in his filmography like like well like Tenet and I think even Inception to an extent where like the exposition can be really tedious.
Mm.
Um I think it's better in Inception than in Tenet because in Inception there's like a sort of thematic content still embedded in some of the exposition. I think with regard to getting the most thematically out of exposition, this is Nolan's best film. Um, because like just the very process of explaining this condition makes you think about a bunch of different themes with regard
Yeah.
to memory, to time, to identity. Um, I actually have a couple of quotes written down here that I think are like um it's literally exposition, but I think that's still really thought-provoking. Um, So like for instance, and pretty much all of these quotes are is just Leonard speaking. So like uh uh towards the end of the film, he says, I thought I helped her. I thought I just needed some kind of answer. I didn't think it was important what the answer was, just that she had something to believe. Right. And that's him literally just explaining what happened in the previous scene. Like why he told Sammy Jenkins' wife, like why he gave the answer that he did. I'm sure that he could have just not said that and left it up to the imagination. Like why he made the decision that he did. But that like makes me think about uh you know like how people like well it obviously makes me think about like the relationship between hope and meaning, you know. Um but like there's a lot of quotes like that in this film. Like I think in a subsequent black and white sequence, one of the things that he says was, I was wrong about Sammy. I was wrong about his wife. She wasn't interested in the money. She just needed to understand his problem. His brain didn't respond to conditioning, but he wasn't a con man. When she looked into his eyes, she thought he could be the same person. When I looked into his eyes, I thought I saw recognition. Now I know that you fake it. If you think you're supposed to recognize someone, you just pretend to. You bluff it to get a pat on the head from the doctors. You bluff it to seem like less of a freak. So again, this is like him just explaining the condition, explaining the way that he like just his general understanding of what's going on. And like Nolan you know could leave more of this up to the imagination, but there is like some interesting thematic content in there. Like that makes me think of the relationship between intuition and meaning. Like so like I when he said that I thought like first of all the reason why I think this is interesting thematically is because I can relate to it. Like um you know uh you just sort of get caught up in these situations sometimes where um it's like you kind of just get thrust into a situation and you don't know what to do, so you like kind of play cool. And one of the ways that you play cool is just like you know, pretend like you belong, but but in your head you're still trying to figure it out, you know? And that's like what that's the situation that Leonard is in the entire film.
Hmm.
But I feel like that plenty of times, you know, and I don't have short-term memory loss.
I feel like that
So
watching the movie a bit.
yeah, you want to watch it again? Yeah.
I
Exactly.
also I also think that there's a really interesting relationship between I think it's something that Nolan does more subtly in his other films, but with Sammy having all of the tattoos and everything on his body, there's a pretty interesting relationship between sort of we think time is like a mostly it's like a mental construct. It's something that we go through, but like it's also like a physical concept that like our bodies as our minds go through it, so do our bodies. And I don't really have like a super deep analysis behind why I think that that might be something interesting, but I do think that as a filmmaker and as an artist, the way that Nolan expresses, you know, time. I mean, we see time and time again after Memento, all of his characters, you know, they're physically are being impacted by sort of the passage of time and sort of the warpage of time and how time, is bent in various ways. And I just think that I don't know. Like again, I just think that him wearing everything on his body is just sort of an interesting representation of time and sort of
Hmm. Yeah.
physically it's not always mentally us going through time, but like physically our bodies are um constantly being impacted through the passage of time, or in the case of Memento, sort of the unable to generate new memories. I mean, it's both ways. It's the mind and the body.
Yeah. Nolan is definitely that is one kind of theme that he plays with a lot in a lot of his movies. And in that way, I think he's the way he plays with memory and specifically time. Ryan, you'll get a kick out of this. I feel like he's like the filmmaker version of Jorge Luis Borges.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like we've said that on.
Did you just make that arrow?
Yeah.
How did you do that?
I annotated, bro. It should be S tier.
Yeah, yeah,
What?
you can annotate.
What
Look.
the heck?
Anarchy.
No!
Over. Yeah, yeah.
I've lost control of my course.
We're going off the rails.
S tier.
Honestly, bold. Like I think that's such a good pick too. Like Memento as your number one. I mean, it's not underappreciated, but it's a good pick. It's a bold.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah,
that's
so
good.
look, I put it in A tier, and I don't want to make it seem like I don't love that movie, because I do. But the big reason, the logic behind it being A tier and not specifically S tier, is because I do think there's a very clear delineation between where Nolan is as a filmmaker in Memento versus where he is at later in his career. Like, you can clearly see, like, he gets better at all the things he's really good at later on after Memento. And because of that, I just can't put Memento in the same brackets as his masterpieces, which
Right.
are
It's one of those things where it's like the constraints. I just think about the constraints that were
true.
on this film
It's true.
relative
That's
to the
totally
others.
fair.
And
Yeah.
think about, like, if you just laid this story out 2D in chronological, like, it's kind of an interesting story, but like you take the constraint of that being a medium interesting story and then start to like chop it up and put it in different, use that cinematographic, like, I don't know, tool
Yeah.
to show it, take control of the viewer and show it the way you want to show it to make it its
Yeah.
own piece of art. That's for
I
me is what.
I do think, and on that note too, a lot of, like you said, if you laid it out chronologically, it would be one of those movies that's like has a great twist and you would still think it's a great movie, but its rewatchability wouldn't be as high as it is in its current format.
It's true.
Memento is just fun to rewatch, even knowing the twist at the end, just because of all the things you missed on first time you
Yeah.
watched it, second time you watched it, third time you watched it. So in that regard, I do find probably right outside of The Dark Knight, Memento to be Christopher Nolan's most rewatchable film.
I do
S
say
tier.
I go ahead.
S
I
tier.
was I was gonna discuss something that you mentioned earlier, Jacob, about like how you thought that the tattoos were like an interesting sort of like visual representation of like the told that like the relationship between our physical body and time. So I was gonna just mention that I think like the photos themselves also did that too. But except that not with time, but with memory. Or did you say memory? Because
That's a
there's
time.
yeah. Well, the photo symbol I think is really effective in this film. There's a quote really early on where he says something like memories can be distorted, they're just interpretations, they're not a record. Which is ironic because his system is completely based around these photos and he takes them to be fact. But like we see several times where like he's holding the two pictures together and like one is of what's her name, Natalie, and the other is Teddy,
Yeah.
and it says don't believe their lies on both of them.
Yeah.
Right.
And he scratches out.
Yeah.
Right. And
It's genius.
also like he um like he ends up you know burning the facts, right? Like it's 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 like it's not an immutable record. It's as um like as distortable as a memory, these photos. Like he takes them as like the most immutable record that he has, but then like he can scribble things out on it, he can burn them, right? And that like has such a big influence on his perception because he relies on the photos so much.
Yeah.
There are also some interesting quotes in regard to this. Like he said, when he was burning the photos, he said, I've probably tried this before, probably burned truckloads of your stuff. I can't remember to forget you. And then something he says earlier is, how am I supposed to heal if I can't feel time? So like, um, like these are all, I think, really thought-provoking things, even though some of them are kind of exposition-y and some are like are more I think are actually like giving you insight into like his mindset as a character. I honestly kind of wish, considering the fact that this film also has like that sort of visual motif structure where it's like black and white sequences and then it's the film's primarily in color. I wish there was narration in Oppenheimer. I wonder what Nolan could have done with that. But well, I'm sure we'll discuss that later. But um yeah, the I think the photos and the tattoos are like really effective symbols. Another thing that I wanted to mention, so like uh this film, I think what I was trying to say earlier is that with regard, like when in relation to Nolan's later films, I think this is lower in the tier in terms of cinematic. He doesn't like, especially the color sequences, there isn't a lot of visual storytelling. The only thing that really stands out during the color sequence is
Right.
like the flashbacks, the subliminal flashbacks. That reminds me a lot of this. One of my favorite films is this French film called Hiroshima Mon Amour, which means Hiroshima, my love. And they use flashbacks in the kind of the same way. It's like they happen so fast they're almost like subliminal. And I think that's supposed to simulate like be a visual representation of memory. But outside of that, the color sequences are just they're not that interesting to look at. Really, I think the by far the most interesting parts of the film are the black and white sequences and the flashbacks.
I would also say too.
Um, Go ahead.
I was gonna say I would also just really quickly. You pointed out the photos, and it just got me thinking, like, to what degree, like there's most certainly meta narrative. There's a meta narrative that's being woven in here, wherein, like, this movie came out in a theater, people went to a dark room and they saw it, and they were being, manipulated into, you know, believing, like, or not believing what's on screen. And so that sort of further puts you into the sort of shoes of Teddy, of just, the whole thing is an exercise in what's real and what's not, of like what is the truth and what isn't, what is representative time and not. And so I just, we look at photos and we think that it our first inclination is to put a place and a time on these particular photos. But within the context of Memento, what if we can't do that? Like,
Yeah.
what if we're not able to put a place and a time? How does that, like, what does that say about sort of our experience of reality, and what does that say about the shoes that we're in? And so, there's all of that happening, but we as a spectator are watching this unfold, and and in a very deliberate, very deliberate way, we are being manipulated through sort of this, these images on the screen and this narrative. We're being, manipulated into sort of questioning, like, okay, well, if this person can't, who, like, we're a stand-in for effectively, if this person can't understand what's happening, well, then how are we supposed to? Like, there's that sort of layering that's happening with this film that I think I now need to go back and rewatch it because it's been a long time. But there is that sort of building effect where if the person that we're a stand-in for can't make memory and can't understand sort of the cause and effect of time, then, like, how in the world are we supposed to?
That's a really good point. That yeah, that sort of meta thing to it. Actually, one thing that I wanted to mention that relates to that, like in like as Nolan as an using this as an exercise to manipulate the audience, like and illustrate his ability to manipulate the audience. Um, so like at the end, there's that big reveal. Like Teddy tells him the truth. Um, and in spite of that, Nolan has mentioned this much in interviews how, in spite of that, the audience still um, sympathizes with the main character, and I think part of the reason for that is because the photos. Like, how many times during the film was there a shot where he's like, he takes the picture of Teddy, and he flips it around and it says, "Don't believe his lies." That was like this message that was sublimated to the audience like a dozen times. I think it got to the point where like the audience really like wouldn't believe anything that he said.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and I think Nolan mentioned I don't think he was maybe he was being modest. He said that he wasn't going for that, but I don't
I
believe
feel
him.
like all of this just
No.
means it should be S
No.
tier.
S tier. S tier. Thank you, Ryan. S tier. Get it moved, Ernie.
I'll say this. I'll say this. In terms of thematic density, S tier easily.
Hmm.
Um, but I think if we're talking about like this visual storytelling, how like is it a cinematic film? I think it's lower tier. I
Yeah.
think that A is a decent position for it, honestly. But
Yeah,
like, go ahead.
you did. It's closer to S tier than it was a minute ago, but I
Yeah,
still think this is going to be the king of A tier for me.
I would
this
agree.
So
is
it's number one and it's number one in A tier for you, Ernie.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
That's a good.
I think
it's
so.
Okay.
Yeah, and it'll probably remain there.
It's
it's
all
a really
right.
good movie.
I'm not gonna sleep tonight, so
You're not gonna wake up and you're not gonna have any memory of any of this.
Yeah.
You're just gonna lose all your memory.
Okay, it's been gavelled. A tier. Moving on. Jacob, you pick next.
Oh boy. Um,
Anyone but Oppenheimer.
anyone but Oppenheimer. Okay, it's my most recent watch. Let's go Dark Knight Rises.
Ooh,
Because
okay.
I think between just us two, there's gonna be some spiciness. So
Yeah.
um yeah,
Okay,
I rewatched this just the other night, so it's very fresh in my mind.
here we go.
Oh no.
This is going
oh,
A tier for me. So,
Oh
Jacob, yeah, I think I agree with you here.
no.
oh,
This is a C tier, maybe even a D tier movie.
oh my God,
yes.
I
my
Yeah,
heart
I agree.
hurts.
I
I
agree.
have so
I
many
agree.
issues with this film.
Okay, look. Bottom line, Bane,
Brian hacked the
Bane,
system.
Bane kills it in this movie. This is like one of my probably like we can't count Joker because Joker's just like another level of Batman villain. But Bane was like probably the best villain out of all of the Dark Knight trilogy outside of Joker, right? And then secondly, I just loved how Nolan ended this trilogy. I think Nolan is great at endings in general in all his movies. And so for him to end a 3-movie arc with the way he does it with Batman at the end of Rises, I just thought was just so poetic and it just wrapped everything up so nicely for just such a fantastic trilogy in general. This was Return of the Jedi for me. This was just awesome. Now, we can't I feel like we can't talk about this without talking about Batman Begins. So I'm just going to go ahead and put Batman Begins on this tier. Now, I want to make it clear. Before yesterday, Batman Begins was here. But I rewatched Batman Begins. I rewatched the whole trilogy, but I rewatched it and I'm putting Batman Begins ahead of Dark Knight Rises.
Oh.
I mean, yeah, I agree with that.
I applaud that. That is my take 100%.
Now,
You got
yeah.
a lot of things stacking up at A.
Yeah. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay.
I'll say this. I'm pliable on Dark Knight Rises. Look, I think the hype around ending the Dark Knight trilogy really propelled this movie for me. Because I just think about like when I first watched it, I was just like, oh my God, this is the best thing since freaking sliced bread, man. Like this is amazing. I can't believe I'm so lucky to see Christopher Nolan make a freaking Batman trilogy and end it the way he did. But I will say on repeat watchings, it doesn't hold up the same way as a Batman Begins or a Dark Knight does. I will admit that. But outside of all that, I felt like he went so comic booky. Like this was the most comic-y out of the Dark Knight trilogy. But for me, it still worked. Like I loved how like crazy and off the wall batshit it went, but I just like the set pieces were incredible. He just went like balls to the wall with this final Batman movie. And for me, it worked. It was fun. And yeah. But go ahead, Jacob. I'll let you argue now.
I totally agree with the first point that you made about him ending it. I think is spot on. Within the context, I will say, within the context of the last hour of this film, the first 50 minutes of that hour, I think, are just straight up bad. I think they're sloppy. I think there are so many corners that are cut to reach the last 10 minutes where I will 100% agree with what you say. He manages somehow through 3 films, 6, almost 7 hours or whatever, he manages to take every single coherent theme, moral point, the point of the Batman, how the Batman functions in society. He manages to take all of this and crescendo it into this really emotionally effective, beautiful, metaphorical and literal ending, and it's great.
Yes.
Between that, though, I think that from the point where where Bruce Wayne gets out of the prison thing, which, by the way, I don't think that Bane's backstory was particularly interesting or compelling, or I don't know why we had to constantly go back and forth between all of that. I didn't find it compelling. But I think that between when Batman gets out and those last 10 minutes, I have some very serious pacing issues, emotional sort of, inconsistencies with it. And I just think a lot of the plotting was just very silly. It just didn't logically, I think, work. I thought that the whole daughter of Ra Al Ghul was a throwaway.
Also, her death was really weird,
terrible.
and I don't know how that made it into the film. But
it's weird because and obviously Nolan was helmed and tasked with an impossible follow-up of one of the best movies ever made.
The
Dark Knight Rises is objectively a good film. I would say it's even a very good movie. I like it quite a lot. But I just think that there are some issues that I have with it that make it lower for me. It cracked my top 10, but for me it's a C tier. It's not a bad film.
C tier. Okay.
Within the context of Nolan's filmography, though, it just feels a little weak. It felt like the sort of, like I said, those 50 minutes within the last hour sort of reached like MCU levels of corniness.
Okay.
But
I can agree with that. I
think, it's just interesting too, the dynamic. You talk about Bane, and I do think Bane is a really great villain. I think it's such an interesting and absorbing way of doing 2 villains who, at their core, sort of represent this sort of terrorism. Like their whole idea is to terrorize. And I think that the way that Bane plays off of the Joker in the follow-up, I think it's just so interesting, the dynamic that they have and the sort of vision that Nolan had for that character. I think Tom Hardy nailed it. I will say that by the end of it, the voice thing is just, the whole high pitch thing it grates on my nerves by the end of it. Then that's just a personal opinion. But again, good movie. Manages to crescendo the whole entire series in such a beautiful, such an emotional, effective way. But the issue that I have is that I think it cuts a lot of corners to get there.
So look, since I've rewatched it, and I'm glad I rewatched it recently because I agree with you. And a lot of my opinion of the movie before I rewatched it was based on how he just wrapped the whole trilogy as a whole with that neat bow at the very, very end. And it just left such a great taste in my mouth thinking on I was like, man, he did it. He pulled it off. He did a great third and final film in a trilogy, which is really hard to do. Like if you look at a lot of trilogies out there, Matrix trilogy, the Star Wars trilogies that are out there, like it's hard to pull off 3 consistent movies in a trilogy and have a really good ending. So for me, I was just super excited that Dark Knight Rises was, at worst, a very good movie, right? Now, like I said, upon rewatch and a little bit more critical analysis, looking at it through a little bit more of an objective lens, I will admit it is the worst movie in the trilogy. And I have many apologies that I have to say publicly on this video because I have debated this like fervently with some friends and chiefly my buddy Johnny. Johnny, if you're watching this, fuck you. I miss you. I'm sorry that I could never admit to you back then that The Dark Knight Rises wasn't or wasn't better than Batman Begins. But anyway, for me, the beginning of the film and leading all the way up to specifically the fight with Bane, I just thought was so because for the first time Batman had met a physical equal along with it was almost like you said with the Joker and Bane, they share a lot thematically in terms of like terrorism and invoking chaos and things like that. But in another light, Bane is very, very much like Batman in that he is very strict to his moral code and strict and rigid to what he believes in, much like Batman. And he is also equal physically to Batman. So it was almost like he met someone in the Joker that was his complete opposite, but he also met someone in Bane that was so much like him and so his equal and was trained by the very same mentor that they both trained under. So it was almost like casting a mirror in front of him and being like, damn, that could have been me. But that's just his arc. And I will agree. Bane does kind of fizzle out towards the end. And I didn't really like that the daughter of Ra's al Ghul was like the main villain behind everything, yada, yada, yada. Like, I get that. I totally get those criticisms, but I'm just so hanging on the fact of that, like, beginning of the movie, plus the context of those last 10 minutes ending the whole trilogy. I just felt it had so much, it was carrying so much pressure and so much weight for the trilogy as a whole that I felt Dark Knight Rises is on the back of that. It makes it A tier. Oscar or Ryan, whoever wants to go next. Ryan, where are you?
I don't know. I have it as a C tier.
C tier? Dang, dude.
Yeah. I have it as a C tier, and partly because
the Ryan Caps tier.
The Ryan Caps tier. The Caps tier. So it's a pretty good tier. But
yeah,
I don't know. I think when I rank this, I couldn't take the other 2 Batman movies out of the comparison and just look at it standalone. And so I have the other 2 above it. And I also know that it's not in the same tier as the other 2. So I couldn't put it there. And then when I looked at B tier, like there was just some others. I have a different ranking than you for Batman Begins as well. I put that in B as well.
Oh, interesting.
B for Batman. But yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to say about it. Like, Bane is a pretty cool character. The voice gets on my nerves, and I feel like there was some weird mixing, like production value, like production quality mixing, where the voice was like louder than other voices, and that always threw me off. Maybe it was just how and when I've watched it, like on the devices I've watched it. But yeah,
Okay.
I don't have as many good things to say about it as Dark Knight Rises. So
Okay. So on that note, Jacob, where do you have Batman Begins?
Batman Begins is an A-tier movie for me.
Okay.
I
So
think
we
that
agree on that one.
I think Batman Begins is extraordinary. I think it's phenomenal.
Okay.
It's an A-tier film for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's probably the best. Man, I'm trying to think of other origin superhero movies, but I think it's probably the best origin superhero movie of all time. I think it illustrates Bruce Wayne and the character of Batman so well while kind of saving the Joker for later, if that makes sense. Because you can't tell the Dark Knight while showing Bruce Wayne's origins and Batman's origins, right? Like you needed that full runtime. And Batman Begins really is like the setup and the anchor for the rest of the trilogy. But it just does it so well. You understand Bruce Wayne and the character of Batman, his motivations, and Alfred too. Like it's an origin for Alfred as well in a lot of ways. And also Katie Holmes was just such a better what's her face? Rachel. Rachel. She was just yeah, I don't know. I felt yeah, their chemistry was just I felt so much better than him and Maggie Gyllenhaal later. But yeah, so that's my kind of my logic for Batman Begins being an A tier. Oscar, you can comment on both Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises, whatever you want to say.
Well, so about Dark Knight Rises. So I think I mentioned like specifically when I was laying out my criteria, I specifically mentioned that I like density and depth, right? So something that I think is a problem, like I mentioned, I think I mentioned this previously. Sometimes there are films like they're ambitious, and the way in which they're ambitious is because they have like a lot of thematic width. They're trying to say a lot of things about a lot of different themes. But sometimes what happens is you spread it too thin, and you're not able to explore um the themes as deeply, right? Like because you have to dedicate some of the screenplay, some of the screen time to all of these different themes. If you focus on one, if you give one theme 2 hours, you unless it's just a bad screenplay, it's going to get developed more deeply than a film that's got like 10 themes over 2 hours.
Right.
And so first of all, if when we're comparing it to The Dark Knight, I think it also tries to explore the theme of like fear, chaos, terrorism. And I just think that The Dark Knight is better at it. Like as a representation of fear, chaos, terrorism, the Joker is far more effective than Bane, in my opinion.
For sure.
But like on top of that, like I think it also tries to make Bane as like this kind of they evoke like thematic symbolism for like class conflict and social inequality. Like he's a class warrior, right? Bane, the working class hero. And that's also like
Bane's just another construction worker, man.
right. So that I think was a little clunky, and again, the exploration wasn't that deep. Um, that's like part of how he's able to get followers and like create a revolution. But like once he's got the power, like that theme just disappears. I think. Um, I think maybe something that might be kind of clever about this film is so it's called The Dark Knight Rises, and I certainly think that like there's like a sort of metaphor there for like rising. Um, although it's not exactly subtle, but
Yeah. I that is one thing I didn't mention. Like in regards to the whole prison scene and him rising out of the prison scene and that being a metaphor for him, rising out of the well like he did when he was a child and basically relearning fear and relearning his father's teaching like why do we fall? I loved all that. Like, I love that metaphor for what it's trying to say. But that being said, it was very on the nose and like very literal
Yeah.
and not subtle at all.
It was so on the nose it felt like exposition sometimes.
Right, right. And it was so long and drawn out too.
Yeah,
Mm.
right. Now I do think that he was able to blend some more thematic content into that metaphor, because I think there was something in this film about like like Batman as a symbol. Um
Yeah.
right, because like the film starts and like Batman is just like like Batman is at this point is not a physical presence. He's like a metaphorical presence in
Right.
Gotham. And so
It's not who
that
you are on
like
the inside. It's what you
right
do that defines you.
right. Well, so like what happens when he rises is like like the like him as a symbol also rises as well. And
Mm.
that got its own like sort of thematic associations there. But yeah, like I still think like um like there was, I think in that regard it was clever because he was able to blend those together, but then again I take points off at the same time because it was so unsubtle and on the nose.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So
and
where are you putting it on your tiers?
I mean I think B the highest, but I think these guys make pretty good arguments for putting it in C.
Mm.
Okay. So you
Huh.
know what? This is going to be the first
At
ranking
least
change.
Descent.
at least B, at least.
This is going to be the first ranking change. I'm going to meet you guys in the middle. I'm willing to listen to my
Oh.
court on this one. I'm going B with Dark Knight Rises. I can't in good conscience put it in C because of all the high points that we have mentioned, but I'm like I said, I'm a benevolent king and I will listen to my court. We
Remember, Ernie, it's not, we're not saying that it's an average film. We're saying that it's an average
No, I
Nolan
know.
film.
I
Yeah.
know. I
Yeah.
know. You're
Yeah.
definitely right. You're
Yeah.
definitely right about that. The context is definitely important here. We're not saying it's a
Mm.
bad film or a B tier film. It's B tier
Yeah.
within the context of
Mhm.
Nolan, which is
Yeah,
still
yeah.
very good.
I would say,
Right.
yeah, B. Yeah, I don't really. Yeah, that's good. That's I
Fair.
think.
Fair
Oh, yeah,
and B.
yeah. I mean, yeah.
I will also say it. I don't think it's going to be the king of B tier either. I have a B film that I think will be ahead of Dark Knight Rises.
Put it up
Okay.
there.
So,
What is it?
okay. All right. So then I'll just go next. And I'm going to put Dunkirk as king of B.
Mm.
I agree with that.
So here's my reasoning. I think kind of like Memento, I find Dunkirk to be just immensely rewatchable. I have more fun watching Dunkirk the more I watch it. That being said, the first time I watched Dunkirk, I was just so unemotionally attached to this film. And a big reason why is because of the screenplay's decision to, not really characterize the soldiers and like the boots on the ground as they were experiencing all, the terror that was happening throughout the film. Like the character that I kind of attached myself to most was the pilot, Tom Hardy, and he's not really like a character, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like no one really goes through some emotional arc throughout this. It's kind of like that movie 1917 where it's like every character static, but like the cinematography and the technical feat behind this film and the action itself are all just incredible. Like those things are S tier, but so like I've mentioned before, like so much of what my enjoyment of films is like how it moves me and the emotion behind the film, the emotional core of it. And because of that, I found this film to be one of Nolan's more like emotionally empty films, if that makes sense. But everything else outside of that was just fantastic. And so because of that, it's not going to be a D tier or C tier for me. It's like right there in that middle ground of like, everything else was great, but that one thing that's really important to me, character work, an emotional arc. Those things were absent from me in particular. And I think that's why on repeat watching, like I know that going into it. And so I'm not as like disappointed, I guess is the best way to put it. But like, I think Dunkirk came after Interstellar, right? That was the movie
Yes.
immediately following that. And, on the back of Interstellar, which was, we've all mentioned his most emotional film. And then to go to Dunkirk, I was just like, it was just kind of a letdown is what it was. So yeah,
Where
so that's
where are the wormholes?
right.
Where are the wormholes?
Where are my emotional wormholes? Where are my wormholes to find the soul?
I
Whoa.
to add
My
to
soul
add one,
holes.
because I think Jacob's got a dissent on this. I just want to
Oh yeah.
add a little support.
Okay.
The way I interpreted it, Ernie, because you say there's not a lot of like character development. The way I look at it is like the character is the Allied forces. It's like what the nation experienced.
Mm,
Because for me, watching it a few times now, and now having learned how important and like this area and this battle of Dunkirk was to like the English nation and how much of a story it was locally, I think it made more sense. And him being from London and
true.
knowing how like touching and how powerful this story is. So that's how I interpret it. Knowing that, put in B. I think it's got a lot of other really good qualities too,
Yeah.
just like battle scenes and feeling that. Um, yeah.
And I also want to mention, I do think this was one of Nolan's coolest quirks with time and how time is conveyed over film too. Like I loved the concept of showing one timeline that was over a period of weeks versus another timeline that was shown over a period of days versus the other timeline that's shown over a period of hours. Like when that kind of like all clicked and came through, when it started making sense to me, I was like, oh shit, this is badass. This is like a really cool little film technique that he's using here. That I don't think other directors or other filmmakers have really like leveraged or used to the same extent that Nolan has. I think The Witcher kind of has attempted to, but obviously not as well as Nolan has. But anyway, Jacob, I'll let you argue your point.
All right. So I recently watched this actually for the very first time since I saw it in theaters. And it blew me away. I think that this for me is absolutely an S tier film.
S tier?
This is in my top four.
Whoa.
I think that to speak to a couple of points, I think that sort of I will acknowledge and I do agree that the sort of ubiquity of all of the characters is at times sort of frustrating, a little bit opaque, because it can be kind of difficult to not only keep track of who's doing what, but also sort of what the motivations for things that are being done on screen are. So I think absolutely it can be difficult to track. On the other hand, I think that this works directly into the hands of what Christopher Nolan is doing. And I think that for me, this whole film feels sort of like this very impressionistic sort of mood piece where you're told I was completely entrenched in the emotional aspect of every single frame, every single scene, and everything that was happening. There was one point in the movie. There's one point where they, the main group of soldiers, Harry Styles and Rami Malek, and I believe there's another one. They were in the main ship. The ship explodes during the night. They take the lifeboats back to the beach to await another ship. There's a particular moment where they're sitting on the beach and they're eating or drinking, and they watch this guy walk over into the beach, and he goes into the ocean to drown himself. That moment for me is sort of the thesis statement of this film, and it sort of evokes the entire emotional aspect of it, that this spectacle of war is it's not only is it so harrowing that somebody would do that, but it's so, as an audience, unthinkable that this would ever happen. And to me, I mean, there are moments in that film where I feel like I'm sitting on the beaches of Dunkirk. I feel like I'm awaiting rescue, because it, for me, is that dread inducing, and it is that emotional, and it is that intense. Um, I think that up until this point, not to say that, Christopher Nolan doesn't have a lot of range, but, we can, I think, generally agree that up until this point, he had kind of been doing the sci-fi thing.
Yeah.
There is a sort of trend up until this point.
Right.
I think that it is such a bold idea to take a war film, to spin the entire genre on its head, and to produce something that's, I mean, this is the first time a war film's been conceived this way, with the time theatrics, with the lack of dialogue. There's this sort of a much bigger scope than just sort of the individual doings of a particular character. Even dating back to sort of the 50s, when we get the first World War II films. I mean, it generally follows somebody or a small group of people, and it just sort of details a particular place and time during the war, which this does. But it's also, you have the multiple timelines going, you have this grand spectacle. I think that, for me, The Dark Knight solidified Nolan's role as a great filmmaker. For me, Dunkirk solidifies his role as a great artist. I think that this film is extraordinary. I love it. I can't say enough good things about it. I can't wait to rewatch it. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about it. S tier for me. It's probably third, maybe fourth, but I love it.
Wow. Okay. LeBron, what's your take on this?
Dunkirk. So I do like what Ryan said about how, like, the sort of the psyche of the soldiers is represented collectively rather than through an individual character. And I think that there are several instances in the film. So like I was discussing earlier with the recognitions, it's like, like there's a thematic statement that's made here that's at the center, like in and of itself is not necessarily uncommon for a war film, which is like, fighting in a war is hard and it requires sacrifice. But like there are many, I think that there are many like illustrations throughout the film of the soldiers doing that, of them like experiencing great psychological toll, and um like understanding the gravity of their situation and being willing to sacrifice themselves. So like a couple of examples I can give you is like that scene where like the soldiers are like underwater trying to cut the line so that they can save more soldiers from drowning, is like super tense. Um, and I think that plays on both themes. Like, that's stuff that can really happen in war.
Yeah.
And that's the type of stuff that um pretty much only happens in war. But it's also important that I think it was important. I think Nolan makes the case it was important for the Allies that there were also those individuals, in spite of those circumstances, who were willing to make those sacrifices. But then there are also like these harrowing images, like Tom Hardy. Tom Hardy's character, there's a bit of humanity that he's given at the end of the film, when like he or no, it was the other pilot who realized that he'd left Tom Hardy behind enemy lines, right? And there's like that realization on his face, like, oh man, I just screwed my fellow man. I could have fought harder for him, right? That realization on his face is like, again, that's like something that you only experience when you're at war.
Right.
And like, you didn't have to understand, you didn't need a biography of that person to understand what he was feeling in that moment, right? He didn't need a character arc. Like you could just see it on his face. And there's a lot of images like that throughout the film. And I think with regard to like the sort of narrative structure, so like you guys discussed, like how it was an interesting exploration of time. There's like these three timelines
Hmm.
that are intersecting, and he's able to create tension, like a perpetual tension across these three timelines, even though like the timelines are like um they vary widely in terms of like the actual time that elapses. Um, but like something like a motif that I thought was clever in relation to that was like at a certain point like there's like a little clock that starts ticking like a watch and you can hear it. It's ticking throughout pretty much the entire film. And it's I think that is like sort of making this thematic statement of like just how it it's like just how aware the soldiers are of time.
Mm.
Like they're on the beach and they're waiting to get rescued. They're it's agonizing. They are so aware of time. They that's all that they think about, just waiting to be rescued. Um, and I thought it was also kind of poignant at the end when like the war is over and the watch stops, like time stops, you
Mm.
know. I thought that was like a sort of also an interesting use of that sort of auditory motif. I thought it was so clever. In fact, Nolan probably thought it so clever that emboldened him to do something like Tenet, which um, which was a mistake. So yeah.
Okay,
Um,
so on that note, Oscar, do you want to? Should we do Tenet next?
oh boy. Um, well, well, Jacob, where you put Dunkirk in S,
Yeah, yeah, it's an S tier for me. I also
and
really
Ryan.
want to. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say one moment now that I'm thinking about the way that you mentioned, time and the stopwatch. One particular
Mhm.
moment emotionally that really stuck out to me, and it sort of captures the horror of the situation is when they go, it's the group of main characters on the beach. They go to that Dutch ship and it starts getting shot by Nazis, and they find out that one of the guys is French and they're about to send him up. Um,
Hmm.
that to me is, if there's sort of a sort of thesis statement for that film, it's that moment. It's that just at the drop of a hat, things are bad, but in that situation things are worse in a split second. And so
Yep.
I it you know that's really all I have to say, is just like that scene on my rewatch. Now that I'm thinking about it, like that scene to me, moment by moment, I can play out in my head better than any of the other ones.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
so
think that's part of the, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say on that note, um, I think this is gonna be another change for me. The first time I watched it, it was B tier, but on repeat viewings and I guess understanding what Nolan was going for a little bit better has definitely enhanced my viewing experience of it. So on that note, I'm gonna move it up to A tier. It's not quite S tier for
Wow.
me because look, S is like sacred, right? Like that's what S stands for me. Like this is sacred Nolan films, and it's not quite there for me, but I will adhere to the court's opinion on this, and we will meet in the middle at A here.
Oscar, where would you rank it?
But Dunkirk,
Yeah.
I like A. I like A tier for it. Yeah.
Okay.
I would put it in front of Batman Begins, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Okay.
A is
Okay.
fair for it.
I think
All
it's
right.
I do.
I think it's interesting too, just like just the total like opposite of like me and Ernie, where we were like emotionally, how we connected to it. That was just, that to me is like very interesting. Just what what somebody connects with and what somebody
Mhm.
doesn't connect. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Yeah,
just, it's
definitely.
very interesting. Like we had the same sort of general take, but
Mm,
one landed, one didn't. It's
right.
very
Right.
interesting to me. Anyway.
It's definitely an emotional experience for some people. Like I think one of the ways to conceptualize it is like a war thriller. It's really tense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Right.
for sure.
Yeah. So
Who's
Yeah.
speaking next? Oh,
So,
go ahead, Ernie.
Jacob, on that point, it's funny because Oscar and I have kind of debated this, but that reaction that you had with Dunkirk on your first viewing, that was the exact same reaction I had with 1917.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I think that there's similar films in that, it's just a constant, tense thrill ride. But for whatever reason, right? Maybe we just won't be able to articulate it here. But I felt that same exact way for 1917, but not quite to the same extent for Dunkirk, which is interesting. And I don't know why, and I probably can't articulate it, but yeah, that's so I know what you're saying, and I know what you mean.
And in that same way, like 1917 for me didn't hit.
That's
It's
funny.
I feel the same way. I feel the same way.
Wow.
I think it's just a not as deep of a thematic exploration as like a lot of war films. Like some of the ones where Dunkirk, I think like a better comparison would be the new adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah,
If
Oh,
you've
I
seen
haven't
that,
watched that yet.
it's great. It's fantastic.
Is
that's
it?
an excellent
Okay.
movie. That's an
Sweet.
excellent movie.
Yeah, I got to check that out.
And it's World War One, and that's like, there's some interesting there's some interesting stuff going on there thematically. 1917, it was just like it was just it was nice to look at, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't that thought provoking.
Hmm.
So,
Okay. Next film, Oscar, you pick.
um, okay, let's just talk about Tenet. Let's talk about Tenet.
All right, let's do it. Let's rip the Band-Aid.
Oh no.
Boom. Dude, this movie for me was honestly a misfire in my opinion. And so when it comes to Insomnia, I'm just so meh about it. But with Tenet, I'm like angry about it because like there's so many good things about this movie that just like it didn't come to a cohesive whole for me. Like and a lot of it's going to be nitpicky. A lot of it might sound minor or whatever, but the best way that I can encapsulate my feelings for this movie is that like this felt for me the first time that Nolan built a plot around action set pieces versus the other way around, where he made these really cool set pieces to further enhance and say what he's trying to say with the plot. I might be wrong on that, but that's just the vibe that I got with Tenet. It felt like he was so hyper focused on the conceptual aspect of like, you know, everything that goes on in the film in terms of like things going backwards through time and what does that say for the universe, and what does that say, how does action look like there, like how do you act upon a person who's moving backwards, yada yada yada, how do you communicate with someone like that, like all that. But also beyond that too, like I just felt like the romance of it, like the emotional part of it with the woman, I can't even remember her name, the super freakishly tall girl.
Elizabeth Debicki
Yeah,
or something.
Elizabeth Debicki.
Yeah.
Like I just felt like that whole subplot was just like, like it I didn't find it believable. It felt ham-fisted. And then also like the protagonist, who is named protagonist, was just like another little thing for me. I just didn't find his whole immersion into the plot of the film all that believable. Like, I just felt like he was a passenger in the plot pretty much the whole film up until like the very, very end. And like his whole reasoning for being a part of the plot for me, the whole time I was just trying to keep up with like, what the hell is this guy's motivation? Like, why is he doing the things that he's doing? And yeah, I just had so many issues like with the character, with the emotional investment of it. And then also, I don't know if you guys experienced this, but I watched this movie in theaters, And the audio mixing on this one was just so weird and technically bizarre for me. Like there were so many moments where I couldn't hear the dialogue because there were waves crashing up against the boat and the music was just slightly too loud. And for a movie that had so much exposition and was so fast paced and like you just had to keep up with these like super heady concepts, it was really that made it hard for me to attach myself to the characters because I was just like, fuck, what did he just say? Like what are these people saying right now? So because of all that is to say, yeah, it's C tier for me. This was just like a dud for me. It's not D tier because like it was a visual spectacle and I really did like the twist at the end. I think it did come kind of together at the end, but like the journey to get there, I was just like, bro, what the fuck is going on here? And even on repeat viewings, I was still just like, ugh, this movie's so long and bloated, and so much of it is exposition. I'm like just still not attached to anyone at all. So yeah, that's why it's C tier for me. Jacob, kick us off. I know this is higher for you, so
Oh, yeah. Well, I recently watched this again for the very first time since seeing it in theaters. And I was excited to watch it. I didn't remember it super well, but I remembered sort of the basic outline. Um, Tenet for me is difficult to rank. It almost feels like it's just its own thing in a way because it I feel like out of all of the films that we've ranked, it's on its like own little plane. Like I don't know. It exists for me in a different realm. And so for me, the only criteria I have to rank this film is how much I enjoyed watching it. And I watched it like 2 weeks ago, and I had a blast watching it. I thought it was I just like I had so much fun watching it. Yeah, I understand there are some glaring issues with characters and thematic development. Yes, I understand that there are some, issues with attaching yourself to any of the things that are happening. I will acknowledge all of the flaws, but you know what, I just had a blast watching it. I thought it was so much fun. All of this action set pieces I think are fucking awesome. The crashing the plane through an airport is like, I mean, come on, like it's just so cool. I don't like for me, I think that like I am okay with watching something and or even reading something and not getting every single little detail. So when people whine and complain about, not understanding the time thing, like that to me doesn't really bother me.
yeah.
Um, you know what I mean? Like that is not for me personally, understanding the entirety of a plot of a film is not a criteria to rank it. I mean, that's why you watch things and you watch them again. But yeah, I mean, for me, man, this was like it's still low on the list for me. It was like 10 out of 12, but like I loved it. I loved it. I thought it was fun. I mean,
So what tier for you?
C's fine. C's
Oh,
agreeable.
okay. So we actually agree on this.
C's agreeable. Yeah, I mean, like, is it a great film? No, but like it's fun. It to me harkens back again, the emotional aspect of it for me. This movie to me reads like a straight up James Bond spy thriller with a high concept, sort of sci-fi twist to it.
Yeah.
Some just really banger set pieces. The whole time that they're going backwards in time is just it. I mean, that blows my mind. Just
Yeah.
how that was filmed, how that was
Yeah.
pulled off. I mean, it's cool as shit. But yeah, like I do admit, I do acknowledge all of the flaws of this film. It felt honestly like it was rushed, which is strange because it came out during the summer of COVID. and so I don't know, like, I think by then they probably had everything wrapped up. It just got released in a weird time, but it does make me wonder to like what degree the overall editing, cutting, and like releasing of this film was influenced by the fact that there was a pandemic. But yeah, I mean, yeah, to me, Tenet reads just like a fun time. I acknowledge all the flaws of it, but I think it's a hell of a good time.
Yeah, and I think part of what frustrates me so much about this film is that like all the really good parts about the film, like all the things you mentioned, are honestly fucking badass. Like they're super
Mm-hmm.
fucking cool. But it just didn't have that like emotional weight behind it. So none of the action set pieces felt suspenseful or like I wasn't invested in the characters in those set pieces. But
Totally
like to your
fair.
point, like all that shit was so badass and so
Mm.
cool that like I wish it had a more coherent, like emotional arc. Or just like for me it was the motivation. I think that's kind of like a big thing that tripped me up. I just never was convinced of the protagonist's motivation to do anything in the film because that guy went through hell.
Right.
And I'm just like, what are you doing this for, bro?
Well, it's also really quickly, it is also interesting to note, we've ranked some really good villains. The villain in this movie is terrible.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
that
like,
too.
what do we know about this guy? What the fuck is this guy doing?
Right.
What, I just, the villain in this film is terrible.
Yeah, that to your point that when you said this felt like a like kind of like a Bond movie, that the villain for me felt like the most like a Bond villain, just like, twirly mustache, just like I want to destroy the universe for no reason because I have cancer. I'm just like, okay, dude. Like, all right. It
Yeah, like,
was
go ahead.
no, I just felt like it was, yeah, just very Bond villain corny, like not a usual Nolan
Mm.
villain.
I mean, yeah, to that point too, like, out of all of the villains that we've done so far, like, uh, Bane and Joker just want to fuck Gotham up, but like this dude wants to just wipe everything, and it's like
Right.
we have,
Yeah.
there's no, there is not a single, there's not a modicum of a reason why that is. Like we have no idea, and it's just
Yeah.
like,
Because he
okay,
has cancer and that's it.
yeah, because he's just like repressed and pissed off, like.
That,
If
that
I
sounds like
can't
some
live, no one can live. Like, all right, dude.
sounds
Sick.
like an MCU villain.
Yeah.
Much.
Ryan, do you have any particular debates or thoughts on this?
No, I agree with this placement. I think you guys nailed the quality and just there was some good acting in it. Like Robert Pattinson,
Hmm.
recently I've become a big fan of. Like he's put out
Oh
some good
yeah.
work.
The best Batman for sure.
And
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
can we dissent that?
George Clooney?
George Clooney?
George Clooney.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I
so I
agree with
remember watching it
everything.
with you, Ryan, and
Yeah,
yeah, you were not impressed. I remember that.
not impressed. Like, I feel like Nolan had a really cool idea
Hmm.
and he just like squashed spy and like action and his idea together, and this came out. So I agree with the placement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oscar, do you have a dissenting opinion?
No. If it's dissenting in any way, I think it's too high. I think
Oh,
that
you think it should be
Oh,
D tier?
this I don't like this movie at all. I
Wow.
don't
Okay.
let me I mean I told you that I'm like themes are the most important thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what the hell this movie's about. Okay. Um I think so here's what I'll say. I think like the sort of like central thematic statement around which he scaffolded the plot is kind of similar to Interstellar in that like um the Elizabeth Debicki character is like it's weird because she's almost kind of like the the character that we sympathize with the most and provides the plot with the tension,
Yeah.
because we're the one who uh f- uh the audience is like, oh no, if this guy blows up all of space and time, she'll never, like, he'll kill this woman's daughter or son,
Yeah.
right?
My
It's
son
all
is part of space and time, so
right.
I gotta save space and time.
Right. Right. So it's kind of like Interstellar in that it's like love transcends space and time kind of thing, except
Mm,
instead of paternal love, it's maternal love.
mm,
But then she's like gets introduced like halfway through the film,
yeah.
and um there isn't even really that much to her character beyond that, I think. And I don't think there's really much at all to the protagonist. Um I'll say
Who's
this.
named
So
protagonist. I still
yeah,
can't get
yeah.
over that. Like,
Mr. Protagonist.
dude, Nolan, you just couldn't give him a name, dude. Just name him Bob. Like, that would have been
If
better.
if you're gonna go that route, like don't give him a name. Just don't
Yeah,
don't say
exactly. Don't even give him a name. That's even better.
just yeah. It's like the kid, right? People
Yeah,
just refer to him as the kid. Don't give him a
right.
name, right? Nobody knows his name. Don't call him the protagonist, you know?
Yeah. Like it's the equivalent of saying like main guy.
Right.
Hey,
The
main guy, come here.
Nolan has done like some very interesting sort of meta things in his films, but that this was like
Yeah.
too on the nose, you know?
Yeah, total
Um
misfire.
yeah, I don't know how you feel about this. Um so like I think you guys already mentioned that like the villain is kind of weak and like pretty over the top. Kenneth
Mhm.
Branagh I think is a good actor, but he really
Oh
really
yeah.
hammed it up. He really hammed it up for this role. And
Yeah,
then
I agree.
what's so weird is the contrast between him and the protagonist. The protagonist is just like the same expression on his face the whole film. He doesn't react emotionally to anything. Like I don't understand. It's like there's no narration. I don't really know much about him. So like the insight that I would get into his psyche would be like the expression on his face, or at least his physical performance. But like he's just like so stoic and stone cold the whole film. Like I don't know. He's like a non-entity to me.
He's an
Um,
NPC protagonist.
yeah, and also I think a serious points off because I think this is the Nolan film that relies the most on exposition. But I went
Mm,
to the movies and I couldn't even hear the exposition.
yeah.
Like I couldn't even hear that.
The audio was dog shit.
It was
Yeah.
terrible.
It
It
was
was terrible.
so yeah, it was so bizarre. Like I remember watching it and thinking like, is it me? Like, am I the only one who did I just get a bad auditorium or something?
No,
But then yeah, it came out that no, everybody kind of felt the same way. So yeah,
On
just
on Ernie's YouTube review of Tenet, I left a comment and was like, "Dude, the audio is the worst part of them about this. Like this, the audio is terrible." And he was like, "Yeah, I agree." It's like that, yeah, like right off the bat, it was just like that was immediately. It was like, oh well, I can't hear
that's
75 to 80% of what the fuck is happening. Like
right.
yeah.
what's
That's that's
going
how
on?
you know it's bad because nobody ever comments on audio.
Right.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Audio is just like it's like a standard thing at this point that yeah, exactly.
It's like editing. Good editing, you don't notice it. Bad editing, you
True.
do notice it.
That's
Right,
true.
So,
for sure.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I guess the last thing I'll mention is that the yeah, so like the so the outside of like that sort of central thematic statement that I mentioned. So like if we're going to compare and contrast it to Interstellar, Interstellar had like lots of thematic width. There was like a lot of stuff aside from that. In Tenet, I didn't really see it beyond that.
Mm,
I really thought it was just all about the action.
yeah,
Um,
I
Yep.
agree.
Yep.
so and I do think that Nolan went for some kind of experiments here, like going super meta. And like, he defended the audio mixing by saying it was like he was doing some kind of experiment with audio. It seemed like all of the experiments that he did here, they didn't work out.
Let me
Um,
experiment by not letting my audience listen to a goddamn word of the dialogue.
Yeah, of the exposition.
Lo
My
and
favorite
behold, it
scene,
didn't work.
right, right. My favorite scene in the film was the one where the protagonist was talking to Michael Caine, because that was like the one scene I could hear.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Right. Yeah, he that was the one where he's like, if you got to talk to this guy, you need to get a nice suit, and you can't
Yeah.
just get Brooks Brothers,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. That's funny.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Ryan, next movie.
Let's do The Prestige.
Okay.
Mm, mm.
Okay. Man, this one I'm putting here, but it's like, man, it's close. I hold this movie in very high regard. So, like, Memento is king of A for me. Prestige kind of, yeah, it's like the hand to the king, like maybe 1A, 1B. Because the Prestige for
A B.
me, dude, first off, Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale just kill it in this movie. I found their chemistry, their rivalry just so believable, and I was just so invested in their fight, basically. Just top to bottom, all the performances were great. I thought the plotting was amazing. It had a great twist ending. And on repeat viewings, it's just so rewatchable. Um, and in terms of like the set pieces, quote unquote, like the magic tricks and things like that, this movie for me is just so immensely enjoyable to watch. And honestly, I don't have much more to say to that. I this is one of those movies that I'm just like, I could watch again and again and again, and it's just so fun to watch, and it didn't have a ton to say on like big thematic things, but what it did say on like being a performer and giving yourself to a certain craft or giving yourself to a certain art, I found really resonant. um yeah, that's kind of all I have to say on the Prestige. Do we have any dissenters? Does anybody disagree with me on this? Jacob.
Yep. Okay, so I also don't have much to say about this film, but I just this movie doesn't really do much for me. I think it's
Mm,
okay. Um, I don't know. I would put it in the B tier. I put it above Dark Knight Rises. I think
okay.
it's a good film. I think it's a good movie. I just don't for me, I just don't think that the core relationship between Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale is enough for me personally to put it in an A or S tier. Other than that, like yeah, like I really don't have a lot to say about this. Like it's good. I like it. I've seen it a couple times. I know I told Ernie that I had only seen it once. I watched it again. It's for the first I watched it for the first time since like my undergrad. So it was the first time I'd watched it in like I don't know, like 8 years, 7 years. I watched it the other day. It was all right. I don't know. I don't really have a whole lot else to say. This might honestly be the one that I have the least to say. I just don't really think for me it has all of the things that I love about Nolan.
Mm,
Um, that and I don't think it has all of those things, and what it does have to me it just doesn't land all the way. So it's good. I think it's better than The Dark Knight Rises, but yeah, that's about all I have to say.
okay. Oscar, you rose your hand too. What do you have to say?
I mean, I would put it in the same place, the just in B or just ahead of Dark Knight Rises.
Okay, so
Um,
you both are B tier for this one.
yeah, I think so. This is um so like at this point he had done Following, Memento, and then he did Batman Begins and then for the Prestige, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh no, he did Insomnia too.
Yeah.
Um yeah, I think that like he was starting to do some like this was like when he was starting to like establish some of his hallmarks. Um but and there were some experiments like narrative and thematic experiments here too. that I think he's done better in other films. Um, but I do think like even among Nolan films, I don't think it's bad. There's some interesting thematic discussion here. For me, I think this is a film about obsession. And I
Yes.
also
Yeah.
think I think it's about duality as well. Something that I that kind of struck me like um right before we got to this film. I just realized is like um because Nolan likes to, do multiple variations on the similar set of themes throughout his work. And I think he's done something like uh, the theme of duality prior to this film. So I think actually in Batman Begins, or well, like in the Dark Knight trilogy in general, what ironically enough, what Christian Bale is doing is he's like a single character trying to embody two different personalities.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas in The Prestige, he's like two different people trying to embody one personality.
Right.
And both of those characters are played by Christian Bale. Um which I thought was kind of interesting. Um so yeah, it's like I guess Nolan sees Christian Bale as a sort of avatar for that, like someone who's able to um uh embody like the sort of duality of people, right?
Yeah.
And uh, you know, uh, relatively interesting discussion of obsession. It's something that's uh like pretty typical um amongst films that have like this or stories that have this sort of narrative structure where there's like two main characters and it's not necessarily a good guy or a bad guy and they're in competition with one another. Eventually,
Hmm.
like generally what they do is like they're after the same goal. And so what happens is they both become obsessed with the goal, right? So this is like a pretty typical narrative structure for like this kind of story. Like theme, I should say it's a pretty typical thematic structure for this kind of narrative structure. Like two characters after the same goal. Let's make this about obsession. So in that regard, I think it's pretty typical thematically. There's like an interesting flavor of identity and duality mixed in there. Um, but yeah, other than that, it's not like super remarkable. I'll say like aside like around those stuff, like if we compare this to something like Interstellar or Inception, like in those films, I really, really like the music. And I think a good film music can really add to the narrative sometime.
For
Or
sure. Yeah.
even something like in Dunkirk, just like the ticking of the stopwatch the whole time, I think adds something, both in terms of tension and in terms of themes. Here, though, like the music was like I didn't even notice it. Um, it's it's also kind of like visually it's a pretty muted film but not like in the same way as the Dark Knight films because the Dark Knight film it's like the photography is kind of like film noir. If you notice in like the Dark Knight, um Bruce Wayne like a Batman only appears at night, right? He never appears during the day. And like those are um photographed very like the inspiration for those shots is very much inspired by film noir. In this, it's like a period piece, but it's kind of like um, I guess what he was going for was like trying to um, like visually represent the era, which was kind of like more economically depressed. Um, but it just wasn't that compelling of a film to look at. I guess there was also this makes me think there was a kind of a class conflict here because Hugh
Hmm.
Jackman's character was like an aristocrat and Christian Bale was kind of like working class. But again, it's just like didn't really do much with that theme, I don't think. It's like aristocratic guy uses his wealth um to stomp some poor guy. Like, man, I've never seen that before. So um yeah. It's a solid film. It's better than it's weird. It's got to be like I don't know if I've seen a better magician film. This is just
Right.
what happens when a good filmmaker, does something atypical. But
Hmm.
yeah, like Nolan could probably make a pretty decent film about most genres within most genres. But this isn't like a remarkable Nolan film, in my opinion. It's B, you know.
Okay. Ryan, what's your opinion on this?
I'm with you. I haven't had much dissent since Memento,
Mm,
honestly.
Oh,
mm,
you're with me on this one.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Okay.
I really, really like this film. I
mm.
think the acting's phenomenal. Personally, I am really drawn to historical pieces that
Mm,
infuse technology in a way that we typically wouldn't think of technology being used in history, even though it very well could have been. Like how he brings in Nikola Tesla. And then speaking on duality, there's the whole Nikola Tesla and Edison kind of beef in there. So that's probably the main themes that he's punching up. Um, what else? I mean,
Yeah,
you
and
gotta
also like
love,
remember the clones too.
yeah,
yeah. Yep.
exactly. They're like twins or something.
Right.
Um,
There's clones and there's twins. A lot of dual images.
a lot of duality.
Hmm.
Um, you gotta love Huge Jack, man.
Huge Jack man.
Yeah, I agree with where you put it. So no
Okay.
dissent for me.
Um, you know, I'm gonna move it because I agree
Hey,
with a lot of what Jacob and Oscar said, but I'm keeping it in A tier. I'm just gonna
Ooh,
keep it at
yeah.
the bottom of A tier. Yeah, I feel good about that. Okay, next movie, Jacob.
let's go following.
Following,
Yeah,
pretty easy B tier for me.
agreed.
I think it's probably the best $5,000 movie that's ever been made. Uh, we got surprisingly really great performances from no-name amateur actors. I
Mm.
had nothing to complain about on that front. Uh, was tense the whole time. I was very immersed. Was it pretty to look at? I mean, not particularly for me, but I don't know. Just one of those movies. Again, I don't have a ton to say about it, but I enjoyed it. I liked the character study of it. I just also, maybe this is just a personal thing, but I'm drawn to creepers and creepy character subjects.
Hmm.
Uh,
Because
which
you
which I
yourself are a
this is
creeper.
right up that alley. So yeah, I enjoyed this movie. I don't have a ton to complain about. This is very obviously like very early Nolan. I don't think there was anything like groundbreaking in here. But again, contextually, it was made on a microscopic budget. And with that, it's just an incredible feat for what he did as like a student film. So yeah, any opinions on this?
I had it lower. I had it in C.
Okay.
Um, but I don't have any stronger arguments to bring it down because I mean I agree with everything that you say. It's honestly when I watch it, it's like a film that when I know it would cost $5,000, it's a film that I'm like, oh, I wish I could make something like that. You
Right.
know, just the whole prospect of doing that, getting your friends together, storyboarding it, and it seems like really doable and accessible, and it still turned out to be a good flick. Like it's really attractive to me, but I still just had it and see in the grand scheme of Nolan stuff, the Nolan
Okay.
verse.
Yeah,
LeBron or Jacob?
I think that for me, yeah, I mean, I had it, I guess, 1 through 12, I had it lower on my list than Tenet. Um, honestly, maybe even lower than Insomnia. It was either 11th or 12th. But now that I see it, I honestly, it's just really interesting to look at this film and just look at the trajectory that Nolan's career has made. It's always really interesting to look at these low budget like this Eraserhead from David Lynch, or even like a like an Orchard Keeper by McCarthy. It's always just fascinating to see that sort of genesis of an artist
Yeah.
and you know, as a piece of, I think, film history, I think it's more interesting than it is necessarily as a film. But again, I also have very strong emotional ties to this film. I have a Blu-ray copy of this. I watched with my brother growing up all the time. So I have really good memories of watching this film. Haven't seen it in a few years. Yeah, don't really have a whole lot to say. It's interesting, interesting concept. It's all the pieces are there. Yeah, interesting concept of just looking at the same event from a different perspective. Very,
Yeah.
like Memento, that sort of postmodern construction of time and perception and stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting piece. I think more so than it is a good film. It's not bad, but it's
Yeah.
overshadowed by everything that's ever come out.
Right.
Unfortunately, everybody has to make a first, and this was the first. So
For sure.
Oh.
Oscar, any opinions?
So I think that there were obvious constraints with the budget.
Yeah.
And if he didn't have those constraints, then this film would have been probably a lot better because I think like the concept was like the concept had a lot of potential, I think. At least like the way the film started. So like the way that the film started is very typical of like a certain type of voyeuristic character that you see in an Alfred Hitchcock film. So um he's this unemployed guy, 20-something unemployed guy living in a highly urban area. And he's creative, right? So he's like he aspires to be a writer, but he's got creative block. He's lonely, and he's also interested in people. And like those three things, I think are all established very early in the film and helped to provide like a believable motivation for why he eventually gets involved as a burglar. Because, he starts, that's what that sort of motivation. So he's like starts following people. And he does that in part because he's lonely and in part because he thinks that it'll give him something for his creative block. Now, eventually, he gets caught by one of the people that, like, he gets stopped by one of the people that he follows, and they give him, like, that person gives him the opportunity to participate in his burglaries. Now, most people would refuse, like, would stop the following, but he, like, sees this as an opportunity, given, like, the sort of brief context that's given to his character at the beginning. So, first of all, he's unemployed. So, like, this is an economic opportunity for him. Um, he's he's interested in people, and in spite of like him following people, like his following of people kind of being a really one-sided relationship, like being able to rummage through people's apartments is just more intimate than just following them in the street. Even though it's like a really one-sided relationship, there's like a sort of logic to it that's like, you know, if I'm interested in people, I get to know them more intimately by just looking through their personal stuff instead of just looking at them on the street. And then he definitely thinks that like following this burglar guy around will give him a much more, it could like be in terms of uh potential creative inspiration is a much better source than following people around. So yeah, like 99% of people would reject this offer, but he accepts and it's believable. So I think the film starts off pretty good. Um, but like after that, like you can really see um how it's constrained by its budget. They could have gone a lot of interesting ways with this story. Um, but they like even if he had just like done like a Hitchcock ripoff, voyeuristic thriller, it could have been a really interesting film. Um, but they couldn't like I think that he just couldn't because of the budget. And but the potential was there. The potential was visible, which is I think why producers were willing to give him $4 million on his next film.
Mm, yeah.
So yeah, I think it was like good potential, started off well, the rest of the film was pretty boring.
Yeah.
Overall and also like visually not much there. Um the this for a low budget film, the score was surprisingly interesting. Um, but yeah, um there were also like a couple references in the middle of film, like specifically to at least three or four really notable Hitchcock films. Like it's like that scene where um uh like he like the main character kisses the girl, and then you like she's framed uh it's like framed over the guy's shoulder, and you see her eyes, and she just like looks away, right? Or like they embrace. I don't know if I don't remember if they hug or they kiss or whatever, but she like looks away. Like she looks away from him. Generally, if someone embraces you, you're like trying to get closer to them, you look towards them. She just like looks away, which like instinctively makes you distrust her. And that's like a common motif related to trust in Hitchcock films. It happens in Vertigo, it happens in North by Northwest, it happens in Notorious. It even happens in a James Bond film. It happens in Doctor No. This is like a at this point, it's a trope that's been that like a visual motif related to the theme of trust, that's been done so many times. Um, so yeah, I think if he had the budget, he would have just ripped off Hitchcock, but he couldn't even do that because it was like $5,000.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, C tier I think is fine for it.
Okay. I'm good with B tier. It is gavelled.
Yeah,
All right. We got nowhere else to go. So Inception is next.
where's
I'm going to
this
say
going?
up front, I'm pliable on Inception.
You want us to
And
talk first before you place it?
I'm going to put my ranking and I'll
Okay.
give my reasoning.
Mhm.
I'm going to put it as the dethroner of Memento and
Okay.
put it as the king of A tier.
Boo.
I think Inception is borderline S tier, but it's just not enough for me. And look, I feel like Inception is really Nolan hitting his stride and understanding who he is as a writer, as a filmmaker, uh, and what he's trying to say, right? Like it's a very high concept film, but at this point in his career, he's just so efficient when it comes to getting information across. Uh, the exposition in this was always entertaining. The set pieces were insane. The music from Hans Zimmer, another banger. Leo DeCap, I mean, you can't say enough about that guy. So this Inception just hit on so many notes of what I love about Nolan, but it wasn't like emotionally, or I can't even say that. I was going to say maybe plot, but no, I thought the story was just amazing. And like the twist at the end was incredible. The ambiguity of the ending just wraps it up so neatly. This movie is incredible. It's borderline S tier for me. That's just kind of where I'm at. If it's not an S tier, then it's definitely the king of A tier for me. Does anybody have dissenting opinions?
Honestly, for me, it was in the exact same position. It was 5 out of 12. It was just below the top four, top of A tier for me. Yeah, I don't really. There's nothing really you can say about this movie that hasn't been said. Like, at this point,
Yeah.
just Google it and find a billion articles about all the different things about it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, no argument for me.
Ryan.
I had it in my S tier.
Oh, okay. So it is an S tier for you.
I look at it, um, everything that we loved about Interstellar, I think Inception had, and so it was sort of a mirror for me. Rewatchability, um, first time viewing emotion, like that impact of seeing it, like seeing the construction in the dream world, like love that stuff. And the themes touched in it, like dreams. He hasn't totally played in that world yet. in any of his movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he knocked it out of the park with that. Um, it was literally like everything Interstellar had, which is S tier, except it didn't make me cry.
Yeah, yeah,
The-
that's kind of where I'm at with Inception, right? Like Interstellar had that just like little extra hump, and that it moved me so profoundly.
and it's because of McConaughey and
Yeah, yeah,
the acting, I think. Um, but that was still wasn't enough for me to knock it down to A. I still think it was S.
yeah. And one other thing I will mention too is this is going to be a weird analogy, but like, so The Matrix is like one of my favorite films of all time. And that the concept of the Matrix, I don't think has been repeated too often because they just did everything you could possibly do with the Matrix, right? Uh, but Inception, in its own way, kind of made its own version of that film, right? Like it wasn't the Matrix, but it was dream worlds. It was dream worlds within dream worlds, and so I love that shit. That was just so cool to me, and I love that concept. And like I said before, I feel like Nolan just knew himself, and he just nailed every aspect of this movie and did every, like, no one can ever make another dream world movie, just like no one can ever make another Matrix movie. You know, like there's never going to be another Inception-esque movie. Uh and yeah, so because of that, this movie is just it's hard not to put an S tier, but man.
Also, you know that thing that happens like where so when Google came out, the exercise of like the action of doing a Google search was like everyone just said, Google it. You should Google it. Google it.
Yeah.
Before Inception, did this idea of like something being inside of something being inside of something, did we call that Inception before? Is that actually what the dictionary meaning is? Because
Oh,
I don't remember saying, these puns that we'll say about like, and we'll use like Nolanception or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
He inceptioned him,
Yeah.
yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't, it like created its own like go Google it.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I agree. And that's kind of what I was trying to articulate with the Matrix, and that like it became an iconic thing. Like
yeah,
everybody knows what you're trying to say when you say like, oh, he inceptioned him, like, oh, it's a thing within a thing, or he planted
exactly.
that memory within him, or he planted that idea within him. Like, yeah, it's just so iconic that, and it was done so well that like there's not going to be a knockoff Inception or anything like that. Like that is everything you can possibly
No.
say about that was in that movie was said, and was said to the best of its abilities.
Part of the reason why like I don't really have a whole lot to say about it is just, I mean, what is there to say about Inception that like hasn't already been said?
Right.
Like, it's sort of it's kind of, for me it's a lot like Mulholland Drive in that sense, and that there's just so many discussions on the internet, like critical analysis. Like it's one of those things that's such a high concept that was pulled off, and it had like the perfect script, the perfect act. I mean, everything about it was just done so well that it's like, well, there's not a whole lot to say about it that isn't just retreading
Yeah.
things that have already been
Out
said.
of
I mean, what is
the
say about
Oscar,
out of
Inception
the
any
that's new at this
entire
point?
well, out of the entire Nolan filmography, is that the most discoursed one, you think?
Um, I feel
Hmm.
like for me personally, it's got to be. I mean, just in terms of like time that passage, it's got to. I feel like it's that and The Dark Knight, but Inception. I feel like Inception has so many different layers to it.
Yeah.
But I mean, looking over here, yeah, I feel like it's got to be between those two. I also think
Yeah.
the year 2010, when it came out, 2010. 13 years ago seems like, not, I mean, obviously it's not the advent of the internet, but that was like, when social media, 2010 was when like Twitter, everything started to really like coalesce into becoming like this
True.
big, what it is now than what it was at the beginning of the 21st century. So I feel like, yeah, it was, I mean, it's a huge deal. So
What 2010 was also the year that The Social Network came out, the film, the David
yeah,
Fincher film,
yeah.
the same year. I like the comparison that you made to The Matrix because um, one of the sort of interesting things that happens in The Matrix is like the characters are given the choice of
Mm.
like seeing the truth for what it really is, or like taking the blue pill and like living in ignorance. What's interesting, interesting about the um like that comparison with regard to Inception is that like in a sense, um if something terrible happens, like your wife commits suicide, what you could do is you could just live in a dream world forever, where um you don't have to confront that reality. You can just live in a dream world where she's still alive, right? But I think something that's kind of clever with what this film does here is that um like it sort of makes the point that ignorance can't be truly bliss, you know,
Mm.
like like it never, like you can't just stay in dreamland forever,
Mm.
you know. It starts to fall apart. And of course, the people who are the most ignorant situationally throughout this film are the people whose dreams are being exploited, right? It's
Yeah.
certainly not blissful for them in a way. I think, and the sort of the narrative resolution at the end, like the finishing of the character arc for Cobb, for Leonardo DiCaprio's character, is like him acknowledging uh acknowledging his role in the death of his wife, and letting go of it. Right. That's like visually represented by him just like not not looking at whether um what was it, the what do you call them, the totem?
Yeah.
What are they called, the totems? Whether his is gonna reveal whether he's dreaming or not. He doesn't care anymore.
Mm.
Um and him finally seeing his children's face at the end. It's him choosing to live in reality rather than having this fractured relationship with his dreams. Yeah, I think it's it's interesting in that uh it has an interesting relationship to the Matrix. I feel like a Matrix sequel could have been really, really interesting if it was more similarly structured to Inception than what the actual Matrix sequels were like.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is top tier Nolan. I personally, I would flip Inception and Interstellar, their positions. That's what I would do.
Really? Okay.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a
I
hot
think
take.
Inception is a better film, in my
Better than
opinion.
Interstellar.
In my
Whoa.
opinion, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean,
Okay.
I was the one the only person who didn't think it was S tier. So
True.
I
Yeah.
yeah,
could I could be fine with that. For me, it
I
was
I could not. And that is why Interstellar
Regrettable.
will remain S tier.
for me, Interstellar was 4 and Inception was 5.
Mm.
Dunkirk 3. So I would not be opposed to the flip.
Okay. Yeah, I do see Interstellar and Inception as in like similar vein, similar quality. It's like it's peak Nolan. Like if you before Oppenheimer, if you had to show someone 3 or 4 films, Inception and Interstellar are probably both going to be in there. Yeah,
Fair.
but with that being said, it's time to drop the bomb, quote unquote. Where does Oppenheimer fit now within the context of this? I'm going to say once again, I'm pliable on this one. And I think it's because it's fresh and I need to watch it again to really solidify my opinions on this. But for now, it's going to once again dethrone the A tier and be the king of A tier. I once again, it's like right there, borderline S, but I need to watch it again to kind of confirm my feelings and see if it's rewatchable, you know. But God, Oppenheimer was a Boppenheimer, as
It blew
Jacob
you
says.
away.
It blew me away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just this was like one of the best 3 hour movies I think I've ever seen. It was nonstop pace. I was pretty much at the edge of my seat the whole time, even though it was just, you know, a lot of it is dialogue driven, a lot of it's just like character interactions. And that's probably also why I loved it so much, because it was just so deeply, deeply a character study of a great man who was struggling to be a decent man, which is, you know, another kind of trope when it comes to like a character study of one great man. I think we see that a lot. You know, when we study great men who struggle to be good family men, good husbands, and things like that. I just find that fascinating in and of itself. But then you also further contextualize it in that he was just so concerned with grander notions and grander things of you know, reality in the world and his impact on the world. uh and you just, it was so beautifully illustrated with, you know, the eventual antagonist of the film in Robert Downey Jr.'s character, who is just so ego driven and so human uh in his dealings with academia and his, you know, wanting to be noticed and wanting to be, you know, one of those guys who has a seat at the table, when in reality people like Oppenheimer are just so not concerned with these like very human things, you know. I and yeah, it all just crescendoed so beautifully to the very end of the movie, which I thought was one of Nolan's best endings of any of his movies. Yeah, I hold this movie in such high regard. I thought Cillian Murphy killed it. Um, Robert Downey Jr. stole the show. He was so good. The visuals of it were just incredible. The music of it was awesome. Yeah, I like, I don't have many bad things to say about this movie. Um, and it might be S tier. I can be convinced. So with that said, what are the opinions of my court?
S tier.
S tier. Where is it?
Thanks,
1 through 12 for you?
Two.
Two?
Two, maybe even one. Yeah, I love this movie. I think this movie is incredible.
You've got it contending with Dark Knight.
Yeah, I think this movie is, not only is it one of the, I think, the best in general in this decade of the films that I've seen. Not only do I think it's one of the best films that I've seen, uh, I think it's probably the best theater experience I've ever had.
Mm,
I've seen it 3 times in theaters, and I think it's seeing it in a theater in 70 millimeter film.
yeah,
I mean, it's. I'm trying to imagine seeing this at my house and not having the sound system and the picture.
yeah,
Like, it's honestly, like, I'm a little bit sad that, like,
yeah, yeah.
once this leaves theaters, like, I have to watch it at home. Like, that's how I think monumental the experience of seeing this on
I
a big.
agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, it to me is, it's, I mean, we talk about, Oscar talked about, the sort of cinematic qualities of Nolan films. To me, this movie is pure cinema. I mean, it's pure, just 3 hour thrill, edge of your seat entertainment. It has the thematics to match. I think the score is incredible. I think the visuals are incredible. The practical effects are incredible. The acting's great. I mean, to me, like like The Dark Knight is everything you could want in a movie. I think this movie's incredible.
Okay.
Jacob, would you say that it's atomic?
It's nuclear. Yeah,
Is it nuclear?
it is. It's
Nolan
true.
goes nuclear.
Yeah.
No one goes nuclear.
I
Okay.
thought that I when I heard like I saw those articles published that's like, Nolan doesn't like to use special effects. He's gonna try and do a practical nuke. I thought what was gonna happen is he was gonna do like a Tenet thing where we have to hear a dialogue over a nuke. I'm so glad he didn't do that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I adored this movie also. I am in the same bucket. I think if I watch it another time, I've seen it one time, it'll probably perk up the S tier.
Mm,
It's got, yeah, I mean, the total cinema experience. It's like it would be in the dictionary for the word cinematic. Um, the sound design really stood out. That
yeah.
was an experience. The music was an experience. The acting was an experience. It was it was great. But I also have it in A tier.
Oscar,
I
what
I
tier do you have it in?
I think so in terms of number, I'd put it like third or fourth. I mean, I think it could be S tier. I think it's on the line between S and A tier. Um, but that's like I'm gonna see it again tomorrow. That's like I guess based on my only on my first viewing. I wanted to watch it again. I just haven't had the time, but I'm gonna watch it again tomorrow. But like it was an S tier first viewing. In like the theater
Yeah.
viewing,
Yeah.
like the theater viewing experience was definitely S tier.
Mm.
Um, I'll say so. There are a lot of interesting things going on here. So, um, I think structurally, the way that like the narrative structure, it's I'm trying to think because I'm trying to compare it to Memento as a character study. Um, I think that Memento like has some really interesting things going on there thematically because, like I said, even when there was just like pure exposition with regard to his condition, like he's still imbued it with like a lot of the thematic content. Um, so uh, a- I think this film is a better character study, but I'm trying to figure out whether it's like better because um like if is J. Robert Oppenheimer just a more interesting person than Leonard? I think he definitely
Yes.
is.
Yes,
He definitely
definitely.
is.
Absolutely.
Um and I think I'm trying to like a lot of the things that you guys mentioned, I mean I definitely agree with. I'm trying to see like trying to critique it in a way because there I think I mean I don't think that it's Nolan's best film for a reason. Um, so with regard to it, like an analysis of it as a character study, um, it wasn't as if Nolan was like completely opposed to using narration in this story. And I think maybe this film would have benefited from it if there was some narration. The reason I say that is because there is narration in this film, but it only happens once. It's during the Trinity test when he like kind of says to himself, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Right? That's the only narration in the entire film, right? And I think he uses it to great effect in that scene. But like outside of that, I think the performance was really good. Like you get um I think you understand a lot about his psyche just because of like how expressive Cillian Murphy is. But I still felt like during really important parts of the film, like we were still at arm's length. And I want to know, like, I really want to know what's going inside the head of a person like that, you know? And I don't mean just emotionally, like, because that was like a really, really smart person. I
Right.
wanted to know how he would comment in some of these situations aside from like outside of the Trinity test,
See, I actually kind of like that aspect because
Me too.
in a certain way, people like Albert Einstein and J. Robert Oppenheimer, there's this like mystical quality to them that
Mm,
in a certain way they are unknowable because they are
mm,
so brilliant but brilliantly well-rounded too. And that's kind of what
mm,
I admire about Oppenheimer so much is that, he was this brilliant mathematician and physicist, but he was also so concerned with ethics and morality, and he loved poetry and literature. He was
mm,
just so well-rounded in everything he did. Um, that his worldview was just fascinating, and the way that he thought of humanity and his place within humanity was, it's one of those things that where like even if you tried to articulate, his inner character through narration or dialogue, I don't think it would still hit, fully how he viewed the world or how he viewed himself. And so that kind of like arm's length quality, I actually thought, for me at least, kind of played up the character for me.
mm,
I also like I agree with that in the aspect of that. To me, the film really spoke. I feel like there's a lot of people that are trying to sort of attach things to Nolan's decisions uh, regarding Oppenheimer that like aren't in the film. Specifically, I feel like a lot of people are trying to politicize the film and
Right. Yeah.
one way or another, and just put it just a bunch of really bad, like terrible, not good takes. But I think what's so interesting to me is the way in which like the film presents Oppenheimer as a person, as somebody who's deeply flawed, deeply conflicted, flawed to I mean a fault. Like I mean
Yeah.
he could not get out of his own way
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of the situations, and I think that Nolan does such a wonderful job of not even just Oppenheimer, but historically everybody that's presented in the film, of just sort of stepping back and letting the film take shape and take form, and sort of let this drama that is rooted in history, rooted in reality, take place, but not overly sympathize, overly romanticize, or put feelings into characters that just aren't there. He
Mm.
lets this sort of I think he does a really good job of just letting what historically is in the record play out. And
Yeah.
there are so many discussions that I've had with my partner about, what did you think about this certain situation, because it's not clear. What did you think about this particular point of dialogue, because it's not spelled out for you. And I think that Nolan lets this nuclear sized drama play out in a way that is always engaging, it's always rewarding. There's just enough information when he switches in and out of time to constantly wonder, okay, well, what's going to happen next? Okay, well, what's happening here? It to me is one of the strongest aspects of the film, is that the characters feel real, but part of that realness is that they're ambiguous. You don't know everything that there is to know about the characters, and he's not constantly interested in filling in the gaps. That to me is one of the strongest aspects of the film.
And not only that too, I think it's also an accurate representation of where those real life people were at the time, because look, the stakes at the end of the day, the stakes were, we need to build this bomb before the Nazis do. Right. Like that, it doesn't get any clearer than that. And there's no reflecting on that. There's no, like you said, romanticizing that. It's just, we have a mission. We have a very particular goal we need to meet. What is everybody doing to get to that goal?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another aspect that plays into sort of that ambiguity and sort of the, like Jacob was saying, like not churching it up, not romanticizing things. Like these men were on a very particular mission, and Oppenheimer in particular didn't have time to, reflect and kind of like, create those scenes that may have made us sympathize with him a little bit more, because in reality he probably didn't until afterward, which was portrayed in the movie.
Right.
How did you guys, on another note, so kind of similar to the same vein of like we got to build this before the Nazis build it. There was another thread of impending doom in that they didn't know if there was going to be a ripple effect of the entire universe being destroyed after they set this bomb off.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about how that thread was displayed? And was it like big enough as far as a theme and like talked about and driving force in the movie, or do you think it was like played off too much? What do you guys think?
It was near zero, Ryan. It was near zero.
I think that historically, we were at a point, during the Second World War at the time when the Manhattan Project first got kicked off in 1941, where it seemed that it seemed like the Nazis were going to just conquer all of Europe. I mean,
Yeah.
we were at a point where the Nazis were looking unstoppable, and so it's interesting. Like I hadn't considered that aspect of did they play it off, because it just didn't occur to me. But I think that's really interesting, and I think that we were so hyper. I mean, it was either at that point we develop a nuclear bomb before the Nazis and use it and detonate it, or the Nazis are going to do that before us, and likely also have all of Europe at that point. The summer of 1941 invaded the Soviet Union. Looking like they were going to invade this, or take over the whole of the Soviet Union at that point too. So I think it was, it was like a damned if you do, damned if you don't type thing,
Yeah.
which would further reinforce the aspects of just how desperate everything was. The world, I mean, at that point was the free world was on the ropes. I mean, we were all holding our breaths at that point. But that's an interesting point that I had not considered.
Yeah. I mean, it was. Go ahead, Oscar.
I was just gonna say there's like a really good relevant quote that I think is like sort of the avatar for that theme, is like when Oppenheimer says, I don't know if we can be trusted with this bomb, but I know that the Nazis can't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That totally explains it.
Yeah, right. And that's just another example of just like how fast Nolan was able to relay the stakes of the movie, the suspense of the movie. And that's why like it felt like every single line was important, but it was a 3-hour movie, And so it was just a constant edge of your seat thriller, because not only was Oppenheimer's life so fascinating, but the stakes and the role he played in the Manhattan Project was just so interesting, that the movie just had such a forward momentum the whole time. That it was just a thrill ride from beginning to end. And I wholeheartedly agree with Jacob's sentiment that like I am sad that I'm gonna have to watch it at home. No, that's like legit, man. Like I want to watch it again in theater, because you're right. Like I'm not gonna have the opportunity to see those visuals one last time in theaters and things like that. Like, man, some of those visuals are just like incredible. Some of the best things that I think have been put on film.
To that point, excuse me. So there's that first song cue and that first montage right after Oppenheimer talks to Niels Bohr. There's that first one where he's like, testing his, he's throwing the glasses against the wall.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't realize it the first time I watched it because I was so invested in it. But, the very end when the final line, he talks about, he says, I believe we did. I believe we destroyed the world with what we created. There's that same thing. There's that same thing. It's almost the exact same musical cue. It's the same montage, but it has a slightly different ring to it, the music, and the images are slightly different. So right before the first montage, Niels Bohr says, it's not about can you hear the, or it's not about can you write the music, can you hear the music? And he says, can you
Oh,
hear the music,
yeah.
Robert? And he says, yes, yes, I can. So the film thematically, structurally, is a journey from that one point where he's so excited, he's a young up and coming nuclear physicist, to just uttering to the greatest scientist of a generation before him that we destroyed ourselves. The film is a journey between from one point to the other. And I, the second and third time I watched it, I picked up on it, and the music is just so good. The images, the
Wow.
montage,
Yeah.
everything works to this just incredible crescendo. This moment of realization, and it's just it's so moving and it's so good. And like, you talked about all of the beautiful moments. For me, like, I'll never forget like making that connection the second time I watched it, and like just letting it all soak in and seeing the credits roll, and just the emotion that went with it. I mean, it's just, to me, it's the most emotional moment that I've felt watching a Christopher Nolan film. It was otherworldly.
Dude, I got chills while you were telling me that, and I moved it into S tier because
Yeah.
of that. That just
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, I just you're so right about that, and now I'm looking even more forward to watching it again, because now that you pointed that out, I can remember that. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, that ending is just
Oh,
so incredible.
oh yeah. The ending, I think it might be, I mean, The Dark Knight is really, really good. He has some really good endings. Obviously we can I'll argue semantics, but it's one of the best endings, this
Yeah.
that exchange, and the way that it's introduced at the very beginning, and it looms over the
Yes,
entire movie.
for
It
sure.
looms,
Yeah.
it's like, what's happening? Are we going to go back? And then it's like, yeah, okay, of course. The very last moment here, here's this little nugget of
Yeah.
information. Um, so
And
yeah,
I that in particular, I just absolutely adored on the theme that it played on, in that we were so, from a character perspective, we were so invested in it, from like oh my God, was he gossiping about Robert Downey Jr.'s character?
yeah,
And
yeah,
Robert Downey Jr.'s character, what he was the human aspect of that moment, right? Like he was
right.
the, you know, metaphorically speaking, the boots on the ground for that moment. But in reality, the real dialogue that happened between Einstein and Oppenheimer was just so beyond humanity and human emotion and human ego. What their concerns were just so beyond that petty moment. And for the movie to end on that note and kind of leave the audience like, dude, this is it literally induced an existential crisis in me,
Oh
like
yeah,
leaving that movie.
yeah.
It was just so effective in what it was communicating, that yeah, man, I that movie was incredible.
I'll say one thing about some of the one of the things that you guys previously mentioned about how you kind of liked that the narrative was keeping a little bit of an emotional distance from Oppenheimer. I will say that like one of the aspects of the film in which that really worked, like that sort of narrative approach worked, is in its exploration of guilt, because so like for instance, it's the sort of Nolan exploration of guilt throughout his filmography, specifically people who feel like they're responsible for the death of someone else. So like in Memento, at the end, you sort of get the feeling like, oh, he like he's responsible for his wife's death. And so like this sort of like subjective perspective of his is like him trying to repress those memories, right? So like that, like he's trying to say that like when people feel guilty, sometimes they repress the sources of their guilt. And then in Inception, um, they they it's like like in a scenario where you can't repress it, you can't outrun it. Um, you're like constantly in conflict with it, and it can like consume you. Like I think that's what Inception was trying to say about guilt. And now in Oppenheimer, like there's like so like the emotional distance really serves to it really complements this specific exploration of guilt because um he's also like both physically and emotionally distant from the victims of his actions, right?
Mm.
Like you never see a
Yeah.
single Japanese person in the entire film. And like they're so distant that like his psyche tries to evoke the image of them. Like he starts hallucinating that he's seeing, charred Japanese bodies. Like at that rally that he gave right after the
Hmm.
Trinity test,
Yeah.
he was like seeing these apocalyptic visions. And I thought that that was like so much more effective because um like since we had his perspective, we never saw any Japanese people before that, you
Mm.
know? Um so I think the sort of emotional distance that the narrative um uh like the narrative takes with regard to Oppenheimer works in its exploration of guilt. And maybe that was um like one of the main things that Nolan was going for, because certainly in the second half of the film, it's like that's like right at the core of his conflicted feelings is his guilt, right? He says to the President of the United States, "I feel like I have blood on my hands." So,
Yeah.
Mm.
right,
I think to that point too that the distance that the narrative has from a lot of the its central characters is it's almost like an invitation from Nolan to like open a dialogue about all of these things that have happened.
right, right,
It like with what you said about it doesn't it's so distant from the atomic bomb the bombings that it's almost like Nolan isn't moralizing one way or another. He's
right,
simply showing you what happened. And people feel very strongly about the atomic bombings, rightfully so. The historical record from you get 100 different historians who wrote about what happened and the necessity of it are going to give you 100 different answers. I mean, it's a complex subject.
Mm.
And so
yeah,
I think that it it opens up sort of how we remember this very brutal time in history and sort of the necessity to share our feelings about it and to not have knee-jerk reactions of just immediately, oh well, everything is all bad or everything is all good. Like that's as the film demonstrates with Oppenheimer himself, like that's just not how things in reality work. And so not even to mention the character of Strauss. Strauss is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he in
Right.
between? He's probably in between. I mean, like
Right.
he did some bad things, but in the end, I mean, if you watch it very closely, uh, Strauss even says openly, like, I gave him what he wanted. He wanted to be remembered for the Trinity test, not for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I gave it to him. Human motivations are complex. We are complex individuals that have so many different competing drives. And I think part of what makes Oppenheimer so successful is that it's never pointing one way or the other. It's constantly asking you to ask questions about what you're seeing. It's never, this is the answer. We live in an age where this is the answer, or this is the answer, or everything is all right, or everything is all wrong. And it's like, no, Oppenheimer takes that entire concept in a historically rooted, grounded drama, and it asks us to ask very deep, hard, conflicting questions. I mean, it really gets at the root of what it means to be a person and to live in reality, and to really be a product of events that happened less than 80 years ago. And it does it in such a way that it's such an awesome balancing act of not committing one way or the other. And I find that every time I've walked out, I've constantly seen a new fold, a new thing that I hadn't seen, and I'm constantly wondering, okay, what does this mean in the context of this film? Like, what does this mean?
Yeah. And to your point, Oppenheimer's character flip-flops and changes his opinions and his emotions on so many different aspects throughout the movie that like you said, yeah, it's true. We live in an era where it's like you need to be pigeonholed into kind of one ideology or one train of thought, and that's just how you're identified. Uh, and in studying Oppenheimer's character, it's kind of funny because that's when looking at, you know, the Red Scare and like the fear of communism and things like that. It's kind of the same sentiment, but Oppenheimer is a human at the end of the day whose perspective changes, his ideas changes. And I loved that throughout the film he was not like unafraid to voice his opinion, but he was just like, dude, this is what I feel. Just because I feel this certain way doesn't mean I'm all communist or doesn't mean I'm all this certain way. And that was incredibly timely. I felt like that is just so contemporary to our where we are currently with our society and our current rhetoric.
Well, and just really quickly to that point also, it's interesting the proximity of the way in which Christopher Nolan puts the emphasis of, okay, is this man a communist or is he not?
Yeah.
You know, we like to think, depending on our political leanings, we wouldn't have done the same thing Strauss does, but it's like, put yourself in the other shoes. If that man was hanging out with Nazis or was, you know, lived by Nazis and read Nazi rhetoric, is he a Nazi? I mean,
Right.
what's the answer to that question? What do we think about that if the shoe's on the other foot? Would we have denied all of them security clearance? Would it have just been Oppenheimer? I mean, you know, you know, it's such a, there's just so many small, little, intricate, interesting pieces to this puzzle of a character that it's like, well, what, you know, it's asking us deep questions. What would we do? How would we respond? Was Oppenheimer wronged? Yeah. Did it happen to be in a time where the United States government declared that communism was the single biggest national and domestic threat? Yeah. Okay. Well, then what would have been right? If that wasn't right, then what would have been right? And it's like, you know, there's just all of these questions that it's constantly asking you. And I think that that's so much the point, is that like, you know, watching Oppenheimer and engaging with it it's a deeply human experience that asks,
Yes.
what does it mean to be a human?
Yeah.
And it just so happens that it took one of the most interesting, complex, compelling historical figures and made a film about it. And, you know, that's the vehicle for asking these questions.
Yeah. That I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. That was, you pretty much articulated what I felt in my reflections on Oppenheimer. Like the way that he was treated and the way that he responded to was just, it was just such a deeply compelling human story at the core of it. Which is funny when you're talking about a movie that's really marketed as, you know, the creation of the atomic bomb, but it's really about Oppenheimer. You know, it's really about his human journey up to and beyond creating that, you know, atomic weapon. But anyway, this is the final tier ranking for Christopher Nolan. This is where we're at, nerds and girls. Any closing thoughts from my court?
This was great. Thanks for having me on. Good chatting with you guys.
Absolutely.
Stoked to have done this. So thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
this was fun. Maybe we should do like a David Lynch tier ranking or
a McCarthy.
Have you seen
or
how many
Cormac
David Lynch
McCarthy
movies?
tier ranking? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just tier rank everything.
Yeah.
Let's tier rank like sandwiches,
Fruits?
deli
Fruits?
meats. Yeah,
What's an S tier fruit?
S tier fruit, blueberries, mangoes.
Blueberries? Mangoes are S tier. Yeah.
Mangoes, yeah, definitely S tier.
Yeah.
Watermelon
S tier.
Ooh, watermelon S tier. Okay, I'm willing to give you
I mean,
that.
I really like fruit, so like I feel like I would just put a lot of them in S tier. Pineapple, grapes. Yeah.
Pineapple, yeah.
Yeah.
Grapes, I think, is more A tier for me.
Tomato?
Tomatoes are S
Uh,
tier.
They're an
tomatoes.
S. They're
Are
an S tier
tomatoes
fruit.
veggies or fruits?
They're
So
fruits.
slice like tomato slices with salt and pepper, S tier.
Oh, okay. Little
Tomatoes are
olive
fruits.
oil.
Yeah.
When I
Okay.
get a
All right. We're
when I
getting
get a
carried away. We're getting carried
okay,
away.
okay.
All right.
Okay,
Please.
real
Oh,
quick.
go ahead.
Ryan, is Oppenheimer an American hero? Yes or no?
Ooh.
Yes.
Yes. Jacob,
Ooh, man, that is ooh, that
is
is
he an
a
American hero?
my man's put me on the hot spot with this one. Is he an American hero?
Hero. Yeah.
Oh, how long we got like another hour or two?
I think that
Let's define American hero as a GI Joe. Is he a GI? No, I'm kidding.
Is
I
he?
think
I think. Oh boy, this is man. I think yes.
mm,
I think yeah. I think yes. I think knowing what I know about him, I would say yes. But obviously, it's a lot more complex than just
Yeah.
yes.
yeah.
Right.
I think I think watching this film, I think of him as being more sincere than I originally thought he was.
Mm.
Right.
Definitely more sincere, more of a principled person than I thought he was.
If you
Um,
go ahead.
go ahead. Well, I was just gonna say that like, but the fact that it's like you have reservations about like saying a clear yes or no is an illustration of like the effectiveness of the film,
Hmm.
an
Yeah.
effectively nuanced portrait of him. So,
The book American Prometheus spends a an extensive amount of time of uh detailing basically the events of the book but in like much greater detail. So there are a lot of there are a lot more there's a lot more depth of his sort of left-wing political
mhm.
interests and activities and whatnot. I mean, I am only I am only a person, and I am very like very much left on the political spectrum, and so that very much determines my answer. So I would say yes, but like obviously with like a asterisk or like caveat. So
Mm. Yeah, I think it's yeah, I think that's a fair answer. Yes, with an asterisk.
yeah,
Yeah.
me is he
Would
an American?
Ernie?
Amer Ernie,
Um,
is he an
I
American hero?
so again, I'm gonna agree with Jacob in that like I can only go off what I know of the man. But the thing that I'm gonna get hung up on is the American portion of it. Is he a hero? I think yes. Is he an American hero? I don't know because so
Mm,
much of his life and so much of what he fought against was American ideal. Um, and so can I categorize him as an American hero? I mean, ultimately, yes, I do think so, but I think more than that, though. I think he was a hero and just I don't know a heroic figure to mankind, maybe, which is
Yeah.
ironic because he gave mankind the tools to destroy
Yeah.
himself.
Right,
You know,
right,
like it's just so complex, but
right.
yeah, I think he kind of transcends the American portion of that phrase. But I do ultimately think he is heroic. Yeah.
Yeah.
very interesting film.
Interesting
LeBron,
to also
what do
think.
you think?
Who? Me?
LeBron, yeah.
Uh, uh, he's I think like the primary reason why people maybe didn't think that he was a hero initially when they didn't know that much about him was because he like reached peak fame during the Red Scare McCarthyism era,
Mhm.
and he was like most famous for being the father of the atomic bomb and an alleged communist. Um, so yeah, that like I'm sure that skewed people's opinions for a really long time. But then, like this book, American Prometheus, um, I'm assuming. I mean, I haven't read it. I mean, this movie makes me want to read it. I'm sure gives like a more nuanced opinion of, or like a more nuanced portrait of like what his actual politics and his political leanings were, and like what was the real uh um like I suppose it gives like a more comprehensive portrait of like what were like his real moral failings and which were like his greatest moral triumphs. Um, I think, but like the sense that I got from the film is that he was given a job that only he could do, and he um and like he accomplished it against ridiculous odds, and he did it while um standing by his principles for the most part. I mean, that's like if you say that about almost anybody else, most people would say like, yeah, that's a hero,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I guess yes, with like a tiny asterisk, I guess.
It'd be
And
so
the asterisk is go watch the movie and read the book. Yeah,
it'd be
yeah.
so interesting to, like, in the light of, potentially another Nazi Germany arises in, a decade, nuclear war breaks out, they're defeated because of nuclear war. It would be so fascinating to see his sort of reception and his legacy weighed against future use of
Mm,
nuclear weapons,
yeah.
potentially for uses, for the good guys to win, like how that's going to undoubtedly impact his legacy and sort of a reassessment of his character. It's, atomic weapons and nuclear weapons are undoubtedly, like, bad and potentially, catastrophic. But again, that's like such a point of view thing that if America were to use it against some unknown entity in the future, how does that further complicate the legacy of the person that gave
Right.
us power to triumph evil? I mean,
That's
what
so
do we think
true.
then? Like, what happens then?
Yeah.
So
Maybe this will create a market where we'll get like more biopics about people who are involved with what happened.
yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, like because um like I'm curious because there was like a sort of mystique that was surrounding a lot of real life people in this film. Obviously Einstein, but like they were talking about Werner Herzog, how
Yes.
he was um like he's like a brilliant physicist, but like he's German, and the Nazis are not going to let him out of the country so easily. I'm curious, what was he doing this whole time? Because there was probably some conflicted feelings there too, if he was
Yeah.
helping the Nazis build a
Yeah.
bomb.
Yeah. Interesting.
Give me a Heisenberg film, or you know,
yeah.
give me a Heisenberg film, just
Hmm.
something like that. You know,
Yeah. Well, on that note, please drop a bomb on that like button. Uh, please blow up that subscribe button. And yeah, if you've made it all the way through this video, God have mercy on you. And thank you for tuning in.